Want to catch a glimpse of what flying might look like in the future? Then you're in the right place. Economy class lie-flat bunk beds, vertical flying vehicles, AI-powered in-flight meal service. Buckle up and let's start our flight. But first, I need to ask you, have you ever heard of the Crystal Cabin Awards? Oh, those are like the Oscars of aviation interior design. And here are some of the most recent winners. Meet Skynest, a lie-flat bed for people traveling in economy class. These nests are supposed to be used on long-haul flights. The design is based on a sleep pod island located in the middle of the plane. And you can book a 4-hour time slot if you want to take a real nap during your flight. The best news is that this design is likely to be introduced next year. While traveling in premium economy on long routes, you'll be able to use smarter seating design. It includes wider seats and twin armrests, which means no more fighting for space with your neighbors. Plus, there will be fully flexible rows with cushions that can be elevated, creating lie-flat beds. Lufthansa Group has promised that premium passengers will be able to book suites with double beds and travel on temperature-controllable heated or cooled seats. As you see, these days, airline companies are working hard on new designs of aircraft cabins, and it might impact the entire future of air travel. At the moment, they focus on travelers' experience within the walls of the plane. As a result, we have some mind-boggling products. Check out Singapore Airlines first-class suites, or Air France's La Première cabin, which is believed to become one of the best first-class cabins in the skies. It's going to feature suites equipped with separate sofas and chairs, and each suite will have 5 windows along the cabin wall. This will make it the longest first-class suite in the world. But then, Airbus went and patented the idea of a more interactive flight experience, especially for those lucky passengers occupying window seats. With the help of special eye-tracking equipment, the aircraft might be able to highlight significant objects you're looking at and provide you with detailed information, appearing on a semi-transparent display on the window. The patent also claims that you could send data to devices connected by Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. This way, takeoffs and landings would get much more exciting, and you'd be able to get information about a new country or city. Qatar Airlines, in turn, came up with the idea of Q suites. It looks like this. On the sides, you have individual suites, while the middle part can be transformed. You can choose to have a double suite to travel together with your partner, or you can have some private space, or even move the walls and turn the place into a quad suite that you can use for a meeting. There might also be some improvements in economy class. They're bound to bring more comfort, especially on a long-haul flight. A company called Zodiac Seats filed a patent based on a zigzag configuration of seats. Look at this aisle, which contains 3 and 4 seats, with each of them facing in the opposite direction. This allows for way more shoulder space than regular seating. Plus, passengers have a lot of leg space. Yes, some people might feel a bit uncomfortable having to face their neighbor for more than 8 hours straight, but aren't these space improvements worth it? Now, you might know that moving around the cabin while flight attendants are serving meals and beverages is kind of tricky. Plus, you have to eat at a specific time with everyone else. Or, if you're not feeling hungry, forego the meal altogether. Well, robots might be the solution. One company has suggested using perfectly sized pods that could slide along the rail in the middle of the aisle, delivering drinks and food ordered by passengers. This way, you could get your meal at the most suitable time for you without leaving your seat. This solution is likely to solve the problems with meal service. Even better, it might allow for fewer galleys in large planes. Unfortunately, this idea was filed 60 years ago and hasn't been implemented yet, so maybe it's not as great as it sounds. Another idea connected with in-flight meal service includes using AI. According to its creators, the technology will record what passengers leave on their trays, and later use this data to suggest various catering plans on subsequent flights. Now, even though these innovations sound like they're going to make traveling way more comfortable, they're not exactly revolutionary. But look at these innovations: vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Hyundai Transys's air taxi cabin concept optimizes space and prioritizes your privacy in a shared cabin. If we talk about short flights, there's City Airbus Next Gen. That's an all-electric, vertical takeoff and landing vehicle with 4 seats based on the lift and cruise concept. It can operate within the range of 50 miles and has a cruise speed of 74 miles per hour. Another amazing prospect is passenger aircraft with AI co-pilots, or even pilots. Some experts claim that planes could potentially be flown on a fully automated basis. Not everyone agrees with this idea, though. A skilled pilot is part of a complicated safety system that reduces risks and keeps passengers safe. Pilots have to be navigators, technicians, engineers, and weather experts. On a regular working day, a pilot needs to deal with ground crew, other air crew, cabin crew, air traffic control, and passengers. That's a lot. And don't forget that they need to communicate well, not only in aviation terms, but also on an interpersonal level. Will AI be able to do the same? Time will tell. But let's get back to the boldest ideas about the future of air travel. Some experts think that sometime around 2040, you'll be able to catch a hypersonic plane ride. Lots of people believe that the era of supersonic planes finished in 2003 when the Concorde commercial airplane was decommissioned after decades of being unprofitable. But it seems the situation might change soon. New supersonic aircraft will fly at incredible heights, and their speed is likely to be at least 6 times the speed of any other passenger plane. Traveling from New York to London, in this case, will take less than 2 hours. By comparison, these days it takes a conventional airplane 8 hours to fly from one of these cities to the other. There is one problem though. The supersonic plane tickets will cost a lot, and statistically, people tend to prioritize price over speed. So experts don't think that a lot of people will be eager to pay a few $1,000s to get from London to Sydney in 4 hours. Plus, such planes will need a lot of liquid hydrogen fuel, and at the moment, it's not cheap. By the way, you might not recognize a plane from 2050. These flying machines will keep changing for the next several decades, and the chances are high that, at some moment, windows will start to disappear from airplanes altogether. This way, aircraft will become stronger and better suited for high speeds. Windows make planes heavier, which results in larger fuel consumption. No wonder cargo planes don't have windows. Planes will also become sleeker and will likely be covered with solar panels. There's also a concept of a plane with its cabin made out of transparent polymers. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd ever board such a plane. Talk about aerophobia. The chances are that in a few decades, we'll see a hypersonic plane with a jet engine that can turn into a rocket, that can fly into space. Liquid oxygen would get injected into the exhaust, turning the engine into a rocket. It would help the aircraft reach enormous speeds, and on the way back, the engine would turn into a regular jet engine once again.
Hey, can we speak plainly? Okay. The fastest commercial flight ever was in February 2019, when an airplane flew at the speed of 801 miles per hour. And that was only thanks to the direction it was heading in, east. And the passengers there also rapidly lost weight. What? The airplane diet? Is that a thing? All in due time, though. Here are some mind-blowing facts about airplanes. First things first. According to different sources, only 5 to 20% of the world's population have ever traveled by airplane. But all of them have done it more than once. If you're afraid of flying, you must have wondered why planes don't have parachutes on board. 2 reasons: money and common sense. First, parachutes are heavy, and adding 300-something of them to the weight of the plane would reduce the allowed number of passengers or their baggage. And secondly, even if you have a parachute, you simply won't be able to open the airplane's door to jump out. The difference in pressure is too much. But there's good news too. Some data suggests that sitting in the back of the plane is safer than anywhere else. If you're in the tail, you're about 40% more likely to survive in a plane crash. So stick to the back. The only reason you might regret it is if one of your neighbors in the row is sick. Not airsick, although that's unfortunate too. I mean, runny nose, coughing, that kind of stuff. Researchers say such a passenger has an 80% chance of infecting everyone around them with whatever they have. To minimize that risk, turn on the little air vent above your head and direct its flow on yourself. It will work as an air shield, blowing away the germs and not letting them cling to you. Hey! Wouldn't it be great if you could buy a cheap little hazmat suit from the flight attendant during the trip? Oh, but then you have to crawl into the thing while in that cramped little seat as your seatmates wonder which one of them you're dissing. Guess not, huh? But don't be in a rush to blame your coughing neighbor if you get sick after the flight. Ask yourself first, did you take the blanket from the flight attendant? If so, you might have caught germs from that. Airplane crew members say they only wash blankets once every few days, and the rest of the time they only get folded and reused. Who knows who used yours before you, and for what? Yuck. Unlike the cabin doors, the bathroom actually can be opened from the outside. There's a hidden latch that allows flight attendants to unlock the door in case of emergency. For example, to rescue a passenger who fainted inside. No, they don't do it for fun. Ever heard that banging noise when coming on or exiting the plane? Nah, it's not the ground crew hurriedly repairing the plane. It's just the baggage being loaded or unloaded. Workers don't really throw it around either, but they usually have very little time to be too gentle. If you fly, say, from New York to London and not the other way around, consider yourself lucky. You'll probably be there a couple hours early. And that's true for many planes flying east. Nature itself helps them. There are jet streams high up that, if used correctly, give a hefty speed boost to aircraft. Jet streams are basically constant high-speed streams of air that carry you eastward on their gentle wings. Then you arrive early, and there's no gate for you yet, so your plane sits on the tarmac, waiting. You also might want to step on the scales while traveling with the jet stream, because they'll probably show a rather pleasing number. Thanks to the Eötvös effect, perceived force of gravity is less when you're moving east, which means you weigh a tiny bit less too. The bad news is, as soon as the plane lands and stops, the pounds will come back. Thanks to international airspace agreements, planes flying from the US to Far and Middle East travel over the North Pole, and you can see its stunning icy landscapes pretty close. That's because airplane fuel freezes at temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and the aircraft needs to get much lower than its cruising altitude for warmer air. Make sure to get a window seat. Another sightseeing tour happens when your plane suddenly decides to not land straight away, but make a circle around the airport. This can occur when there's something on the runway, or the wind is too strong, or there's just a heavy traffic down below. Yeah, airplanes also have traffic jams. So look outside and enjoy the panorama. That is, if there is a window near your row. Originally, planes were designed to have seat rows aligned with the windows. But to squeeze more people inside the cabin and make tickets cheaper, most airlines decrease the gap between the rows in the economy class. So your window seat should be more properly called a wall seat. Now, if you want to complain about that, you can come up to the pilot yourself. Just make sure you know the code from the cockpit door. In fact, no one can enter the cockpit without the pilot say so. Even if you have the code, the door will only open after about half a minute, and that's if the pilots don't react. They can deny entrance by simply pressing a button. But let's imagine you've somehow gotten inside the cockpit and the pilots are not there. Uh-oh. Can a regular person land a plane in such a situation, like they show in the movies? Sorry, highly unlikely. Still, if the plane is modern, all its systems are intact, and there's at least one flight attendant on board, they might be able to land the aircraft following the instructions from air traffic control. Wait a second, there's an autopilot in there. Can it land the plane by itself? No good there either. Even more, the autopilot doesn't even fly the plane proper. It's basically just a super advanced GPS that's only taken into account the plane's route and surroundings. It can keep the machine in the air, but any complex action is a human pilot's responsibility. That's why autopilot can only take control at the cruising altitude, which is usually around 36,000 feet. Planes have to fly so high to reduce air resistance. It causes drag and reduces efficiency of the engines. It shouldn't climb too high though, because it will eventually lose lift and drop down, as they say. Speaking about control, the pilot is actually in charge of everything during the flight. Their level of responsibility is enormous, so they're both law and its enforcers on board. They even have handcuffs to tame unruly passengers, so behave, will ya? So that you understand what kind of responsibility is in the pilot's hands. A Boeing 747 airplane consists of numerous parts, like about 6 million of them. Just imagine navigating this kind of complex machinery with just a couple of buttons and levers. No wonder a pilot has to go through rigorous and lengthy training before being allowed in the cockpit. Even their oxygen masks are different from those in the cabin. While a regular passenger mask only has enough oxygen for 12 to 15 minutes, the one in the cockpit is designed to last much longer. That's because of that same huge responsibility. Pilots have to stay awake and focused to save all those lives on board at all costs. And if you think smaller private planes are safer than big commercial ones, that's a myth. According to statistics, passenger airplanes are more than twice safer than private ones, exactly because of the amount of rules and regulations imposed on them. Pilots follow strict schedules and are trained professionals, while private planes are often flown by amateurs. On the topic of amateurs, some believe that hard landing on water should be safer than on the ground, but that's not true either. Pilots even say that they try to avoid landing on the water. It's called ditching by all means. Because of its structure, water is actually harder than soft ground at the moment of impact, and when the plane falls, it'll probably be filled with water very soon. The crew has to act really quickly to get everyone to safety after such a crash landing. And crash landings are exactly the reason why you have to stow your tray table and get your seat in the upright position. In case of a hard impact, an open tray may injure you, and if your seat is reclined, your head will travel a longer distance to the seat in front of you, increasing the risk of head trauma. It's for your own safety, pal. But at least you'll enjoy the pleasant blue color of that seat. It's made so to calm you down. Psychologists say the color blue helps you relax. If the seats were red, for example, it could have gotten on your nerves and made those who are afraid of flying even more jittery. Whew. And finally, the most important question. What are those mysterious numbers on your boarding pass? Your name, gate, and flight number? Okay, that's clear. There's a 6-letter passenger name reference or record locator that's randomly generated for you personally and gives access to your passenger data to authorities. And then there's a standalone letter depicting your class, A or F for first, Y for economy, and Q for economy discounted flight. Hey, if you learned something new today, then give the video a like and share it with a friend. And here are some other videos I think you'll enjoy. Just click to the left or right, and remember, stay on the bright side of life. Bright side of Nail polish removers. You can have nail polish remover in your carry-on luggage as long as it doesn't contain acetone, which is flammable. Also, acetone damages your skin and nails, so opt for acetone-free removers. Perfume and nail polishes. These are forbidden too, but not only because of liquid restrictions, but also for etiquette rules. Some passengers may be allergic to their smell, so avoid perfume and paint your nails at home. Mercury thermometers. In case you need to check your body temperature on board, make sure that your thermometer is either the electronic kind or made with alcohol, the one that contains red liquid in it. Mercury thermometers are strictly forbidden on board, as mercury is dangerous and very difficult to clean up if it spills. Magic 8 balls. The problem is because of the liquid. Even though it has less than 3.4 ounces, it's pretty impossible to measure the exact amount inside the toy. Ask your ball if you can take it on board. It'll likely give you a "don't count on it" answer. Bowling pins. Wow. The security services claim that it can be used as a club, which can be dangerous. Or possibly the aircrew doesn't want anyone having fun in the aisle during a long and boring flight. So spare the trouble and strike that one off your list. Darts. Remember, no sports equipment is allowed, be it a fencing foil, a bat, or even darts. Darts are sharp, and sharp objects aren't allowed on board. Get the point? Knitting needles. Sometimes flights seem to be endless, and it's kinda nice to have something to do. If you're into crafts, beware of metal needles. They may not be allowed on board. Opt for plastic or wooden knitting needles and wrap them so they don't cause damage. Snow globes. Here we go again. Only a limited amount of liquids are allowed through security. If your snow globe is smaller than a tennis ball, it may be allowed, but it's better to play safe and check any snow globe. Liquid bleach. Do you have a few stains on your clothes that you want to fix? First, liquid bleach is not allowed on board since it's an implosion hazard. Second, white clothing is not the best choice for a flight. Third, the plane bathroom is far too small for laundering anyway. Hair bleach. If you're a hairdresser, no hair bleach is allowed on board. Sorry. Scissors are not welcome either, unless their blades are 4 inches or shorter. Cordless curling irons. Bad news for hairdressers again. Due to a gas cartridge filled with butane, these items are not allowed on board. Grab an electric curling iron instead for your best hairstyle. Cast iron pans. Basically, you can take any pan or pot on board if you feel like it. But cast iron is pure metal, so they're considered to be dangerous. They're also hefty, weighing no less than 4 pounds. It would probably be the only object you could carry on in terms of weight. Christmas crackers. Ho ho ho! These little paper packages can make a wonderful atmosphere of joy during the Christmas holidays, but they bring a mess on board. They make a crackling sound when pulled too, which can frighten other passengers. They're not allowed in check bags either. Gel insoles. Surprisingly, these soothing inserts are forbidden too. The problem is, it can be hard to measure the exact amount of liquid in them, so sorry, but not allowed. The same goes for gel candles. It's better to check them unless you want them to end up in the trash. Paints and turpentine. If you're an artist, you don't want your paint to get frozen in the luggage section. Security may be okay with your oil paints in your carry-on as long as they're under 3.4 ounces, but there's no way they'll allow extremely flammable turpentine. High heels and thick soles. They are not prohibited, but they can cause some problems. You may be asked to take them off to have them scanned. Sure, there are some plastic shoe covers, but airport floor germs. Wedding dresses. Pack it carefully, airports are dirty, and some dresses just don't fit in the X-ray machine, so it might need to be double-checked. Soft cheeses. These are considered to be liquids too. Any amount of more than 3.4 ounces can be taken on board in your stomach, but don't worry, hard cheese is not prohibited. Tent pegs. If you're a camper or hiker, you probably want to check as much of your camping luggage. But if you travel light with only a backpack, you will probably need to buy some tent pegs when you reach your destination. Since they're sharp objects, tent pegs are not allowed on board. Liquids. Pretty obvious. Still, you can sneak on the plane with more than 3.4 ounces of your favorite face cream by claiming it's medicine that you really need. Just notify the airport beforehand. This hack may be a little strange, but it works. Sometimes. Blenders. If you want to have a smoothie on your flight with the fresh fruits that are allowed on board, bad news for you. Blenders are allowed only if you remove the blades, so technically it wouldn't be a blender anymore. Drills. It's hard to imagine anyone having a drill in a 5-pound carry-on luggage, but anyway, these are not allowed. So if you want to bring home a drill as a holiday souvenir instead of the usual boring souvenir magnet, you'll have to check it. Dry ice. If you're looking to sneak onto a plane with a dry ice DIY fridge, you may fail. Dry ice is flammable, so safety regulations may prohibit it on board. You can bring up to 5.5 pounds of dry ice, but permission from the airline is required. Heating pads. If you want a heating pad, feel free to bring an electric one, even though you may not be able to take advantage of it during the flight. But gel heating pads are not allowed on board. Razors. Anything with an uncovered blade is not allowed through securities. A disposable razor or cartridge blades can be taken on board, but box cutters and knives, with the exception of a smooth butter knife, should be kept in your checked luggage. Soap bars. Generally, they're allowed on board, so don't panic if security wants to double-check your bag after scanning it. It just may appear a bit odd on the scan and mislead the officers. But liquid soap follows the universal liquid rule. Batteries. The rules for them vary. You are not allowed to bring spillable batteries in either your carry-on luggage or your checked luggage. But lithium batteries can be carried on board. They can't be checked, however, because if damaged, they can start a fire. Laser pointers. You travel with a cat, and yes, your pet loves playing with a laser pointer. But you gotta make do without it this time. Laser pointers are not allowed in either carry-on or in checked luggage. Walking sticks. When used as a mobility device, security may let you on board with it. Or they may not. It's best to play it safe and notify your airline in advance. Happy trails! Hey, have you ever been held up in airport security because some knucklehead broke probably every liquid rule there is? Going through security is hard enough, what with taking off your shoes, emptying your pockets, pulling your laptop or tablet out of your bag. So why on earth have they come up with this ridiculous liquid thing to slow us all down when you hear those dreaded words, "Excuse me, can you step aside and open your bag?" Listen, I get it. Corkscrews and scissors might not be anything special, but they are sharp and pokey, so I can understand why you're not allowed to travel with such items in your carry-on. Who knows? Maybe they might hurt someone if your bag is up in the overhead locker and your neighbor is trying to push their bag in next to yours. Or, when the person behind you keeps pushing your seat with their knees and you've just about had enough? Hey, I'm kidding. But what's so dangerous about a bottle of water or your favorite perfume or cologne? Does it have something to do with the pressure in the cabin? Can my liquid somehow mess with the plane's navigational system? That's why they ask you to put your cell phone on airplane mode. Maybe the two are related. It's got something to do with liquid specifically being within your reach, because you can pack as many as you want in your checked luggage. Well, I'm sure you know by now that it all comes down to security. Yes, we're living in a different time, and believe it or not, there have been cases of bad guys making explosive stuff with water bottles and even tubes of toothpaste. And thus, the rules on liquids, aerosols, and gels, or LAGs for short, were adopted. Many argue that it's not the best fix, since bad people can do bad things even if they only have a tiny amount. But hey, restricting liquids is the fix for now until they think of something else. What's surprising is that there's no single document on these aviation security standards that get used by all the airlines in the world. But there are some organizations involved in the maintenance of airplane safety. For example, the International Civil Aviation Organization (ICAO) regulates everything related to flights, from aircraft design down to the rules of transporting batteries. The ICAO issues lengthy documents with standards that all member countries must comply with, as well as some recommendations to follow. They sometimes even send auditors to check if partner countries are abiding by the norms. But airports and airlines can even have their own rules. For example, in 2016, many of them banned flying with the faulty Samsung Galaxy Note 7, which, if you remember, tended to explode on airplanes. They made that call without waiting for an official ban from the authorities. But the lists of things that can and can't be in your checked and carry-on luggage are the same no matter where you go. So, before you head out on your next flight, here are some things to keep in mind. In general, your carry-on luggage can have liquids, gels, and aerosols in containers that hold no more than 3.4 ounces. That is, you can't take a whole bottle of shampoo, but you can divide it all up into smaller containers. Although, not really, but I'll get into that here in a bit. You're also not allowed to take a whole 12-ounce bottle, even if it's mostly empty, and there's only a little shampoo left at the bottom. Nope, you still need to get a travel size of the product or squeeze what's left of that bottle into a travel-safe one. Now, if you're like me and thinking, okay, if I'm only allowed tiny bottles, then I'll just take a whole bunch with me. I've made that mistake, so here's my warning to you. All these 3.4-ounce containers must fit into a single, transparent, resealable plastic bag. And before you grab the biggest Ziploc bag you've got, remember that your liquids bag should also be no bigger than quart size. That's about 8 by 8 inches, give or take. So yeah, you still must limit your tiny bottles. It should also be able to close, so don't even think about stuffing it so full that technically everything's in there even if the thing doesn't zip shut. Again, just talking from personal experience here. If you're traveling with friends or family, you should also remember that all these rules apply for each passenger. And don't assume that liquids are just about drinks. Toothpaste, sunscreen, deodorant, liquid or gel makeup, even your mascara and lip gloss. These are just the toiletries that must abide by the rules. If you're packing a snack for a long flight, yogurt, butter, soft cheeses, they count too. Finally, here's a pro tip. They're going to ask you to take that liquids bag out and put it in its own tub to go through the scanner. While you're standing in line, go ahead and get it out and ready to put in a tub instead of fumbling around once it's your turn to put all your things on the conveyor belt. Trust me, you'll get fewer sighs and eye rolls from the folks behind you. And of course, there are some exceptions to this strict liquids rule. Anything to do with food for kids, you can take as much as a small child, usually up to 2 years, will need during the flight. Also, if you use any medications, you should provide proof from your doctor indicating the total amount you'll need during the flight. Otherwise, unfortunately, some airlines may ask you to leave them in your checked luggage. Oh yeah, and if you're ever unsure about a certain item, you can always check the airport security website, like the TSA or similar authority in your country. But for now, you've got all the basics. So let's talk about what happens if you forget to abide by the liquids rule. Uh-oh, cue the horror music. Actually, it's not that bad. Inconvenient, sure, but not the end of the world. First off, if prohibited items were found in your bag before you check in, you can either give them to those who accompanied you to the airport or put them in your car if it'll be waiting for you out in the parking lot. Of course, I'm talking about things that can't even be kept in your checked luggage. You can also hand them over to the airport, and they'll keep your stuff safe until you get it back. If none of those options are available, check if the airport has a mail service so that you can send any items prohibited for travel to your friends or family. Now, if the prohibited items are found in your suitcase after you've already checked in most cases, you'll be told to go back to the registration desk, pick the item up, and choose any of those options I just mentioned. Otherwise, the thing is going to be confiscated. Hey, it sounds scarier than it is, but no worries. You'll probably get it on the way back. In any case, if the thing is supposed to be confiscated, but it's near and dear to you, like, for example, your grandpappy's old pocket knife, explain this to the security personnel. Most likely, there is a way to save it. Finally, if any prohibited items were found in your carry-on luggage and you can still return to the check-in desk, then just put them in your checked luggage if you can. If you can't do that, then the thing will probably be confiscated. Again, not a big deal if you handle this situation the right way. On that note, items that have been seized are stored at the airport until the owners return. Just make sure that the thing wasn't simply confiscated forever, but that you get some sort of documentation of it, giving you the right to get this thing back. Of course, I'm talking about legal and generally harmless stuff. For example, let's say they found an expensive cream that you're not ready to part with in your carry-on while you're going through security. If you don't have the option to put it in your checked luggage, leave it in the storage room at the airport. Get all the necessary papers and documented proof, and just pick it up when you come back. Sure, it'll be a shame that you can't use this awesome cream while you're away, but hey, it's better than tossing it in the trash. I'd still say it's better to avoid all that mess in the first place and just stay in the know about what you can and can't transport while traveling. After all, airports are stressful enough, so why make it even harder on yourself and risk losing your precious things? You should be excited about traveling, not full of dread about all the security rules and restrictions. Hopefully these tips will help you on your next trip. Bon voyage! So, do you think airport security is too strict? Let me know down in the comments. If you learned something new today, then give this video a like and share it with a friend. But hey, don't go sneaking that smoothie through security just yet, because we have over 2,000 cool videos for you to check out. All you have to do is pick the left or right video, click on it, and enjoy. Stay on the bright side of life.
You're all set in your plane seat when suddenly you hear that mysterious ding sound that freaks you out. And then comes another ding. Is the plane's engine on fire? Maybe it's a sign to grab a parachute and jump off the plane. The chime does have its secret meaning, and it's different depending on when you hear it. The first single ding you hear is when the plane is being taxied out. Soon after, the pilot announces that flight attendants should prepare for departure and makes the second ding. They're ready to go onto the runway. The third solo ding sounds when the plane passes the 10,000 feet mark. It tells the crew it's safe to get up and begin service. The fourth and final ding you'll hear during the flight means the plane is descending. The pilot turns it on to inform the flight attendants they've passed the 10,000 feet mark. They know they've got only several minutes to clean up and secure the service trolleys for landing. Different airlines might use different amounts of chimes that change their meaning. You can hear a single chime when a passenger calls for service, and when the cabin crew are calling one another. 3 chimes come before an important message from the pilot. The engines on a plane change their sound not because of some terrible malfunction, but to make less noise for people on the ground. After the plane takes off and reaches about 1,500 feet in the air, the pilot makes the engines quieter to save fuel and follow rules that help reduce the noise. When the plane is higher up and far away from places where noise might be a problem, the pilots make the engines louder again. This helps the plane use less fuel and helps the engines last longer. The only engine sound you must be worried about is complete silence. But even when both or all engines fail, a plane can still glide to safety. Air Transat Flight managed to make an emergency landing in the Azores in 2001 after gliding for 75 miles. That buzzing noise you hear as you get on the plane is the sound of the auxiliary power unit at work. This small jet engine helps when the main engines aren't running, like when the plane is on the ground. It powers the lights so you can see, makes the announcements from the flight attendants possible to hear, and helps keep the cabin air fresh and comfortable. It also gives air to start up the engines when it's time to take off. The barking sound you might hear on a plane is likely to be a golden retriever in the hold, but most definitely a special device that helps the plane's hydraulic systems work. Pilots often shut off one engine after landing to save fuel. The hydraulic system thinks the shutdown is a failure of a pump and gets the PTU to work. You can hear it so loudly because it's located in the belly of the plane. When your plane is speeding up on the runway to take off, you might notice a bumpy sound and feel something like thump, 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 thump. That's not a loose wheel or anything breaking. It's actually the nose wheel of the plane rolling over lights that are built into the middle of the runway. The bumps mean the plane is perfectly lined up in the middle of the runway, just as it should be. Once the front of the plane lifts off and the wheels leave the ground, you won't hear those bumps anymore. Something you probably should fear on the plane is getting stuck in the bathroom. A passenger who was traveling with his family from Salt Lake City to New Orleans was waiting in the lavatory for 35 minutes. The door got jammed mid-flight, and 2 flight attendants and another passenger couldn't open it from the outside. 20 minutes later, the pilot joined in. The passenger was trying to kick himself free from the inside as the pilot was pulling as hard as possible from his side. Finally, they succeeded. That airplane mode option you have on your phone isn't there just to annoy you. If you don't activate it while flying, your plane won't crash and it won't mess with the systems on board like they tell you. But if you're on a full plane with over 100 people and just 4 or 5 passengers ignore the warning and try to make a phone call, the pilot won't be happy.
Your phone sends out radio waves when you try to make or receive a call. These radio waves can mess up the headsets the pilots are using. One pilot shared a story about how they were flying out of San Francisco, and he was getting important directions when he heard a mosquito buzzing in his ear. Nothing bad happened, but it did feel annoying and could potentially lead to trouble. You can't open your passenger window on the plane, but there's one secret window on board that opens and closes on some plane models. It's in the cockpit, on the right side of the plane. A pilot can open the window when the plane's speed is under a certain limit. In theory, they wouldn't manage to do it at cruising altitude anyway, because of the huge pressure outside. So, pilots use it to breathe some fresh air while on the ground. And it also opens in emergencies for pilots to escape. Airports also have some secret features, like VIP terminals for those who can afford them. Celebrities use those to get on the flight without the regular pre-flight hassles and unwanted attention from their fans. The Los Angeles and Atlanta airports have special terminals called the Private Suite. They say it normally takes 2,200 steps from car seat to plane seat, and only 70 steps for their members. You can become one for a fee of $4,850 per year. You'll need to pay extra for every trip you take. There are private suites with bathrooms, a food service pantry, a two-person bed, and a runway view. Oh, and you got your private TSA screening and a staff of 8 people to take care of you. Newark Liberty International Airport near New York City has a VIP restaurant hidden behind an unmarked door. It's called Classified, and it's an invitation-only kind of place. Many celebrities like Lady Gaga, Madonna, and Billy Idol have all been there. You also have a chance to be invited if you often fly with United Airlines, who run the place. Once you get there, you have to look out for a host in a gray suit. You need to introduce yourself and mention that you have a reservation, and they'll guide you to the entrance. There are only 36 seats in what used to be a meeting room that was largely unused. Some airports have tunnels underneath them, and they aren't always secret. The Dulles Airport in Washington has a loop system for automated people moves that link all the terminals and concourses. The tunnel is 10 miles long and has a baggage handling system, underground tugs, utilities, pedestrian passages, and maintenance. A tunnel under LAX was built to let the airport extend without blocking the Sepulveda Boulevard. The road has 6 lanes and 6 turnouts. Denver International Airport recently got its own underground tunnel system beneath one of its runways and taxiways. The 6 tunnels will help the airport store more de-icing fluid for winter weather. Have you ever wondered what happens to the items you take out of your pockets for security control at the airport and then just forget to take them from the tray? If it's something expensive, like phones or wallets, they'll end up in the TSA Lost and Found department. But all the coins left behind end up in catalogs and then deposited into a special TSA account. They use these funds to improve their security operations, and they provide a detailed report to Congress to show how much cash they've collected this way. In 2023, it was $1 million. A TikTok user was flying home from New York City to Toronto, Canada, late at night and noticed one strange thing that turned into a viral video. She glanced at her neighbor's screen, which showed 27°C, which is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the corner. Then, she saw that the person in front of them had 26°C, closer to 79, on their screensaver. Since the rest of the screensaver was a tropical landscape, she figured out it must be the destination temperature in Celsius. But nope, she was heading to Toronto in late October, far from tropical dreams. So what did that temperature stand for, and why on earth was it different for different seats? It took her a while to realize that the numbers and letters actually stood for passengers' seat locations. Plenty of fellow TikTok users supported the video's author and said that they had to read the comments to figure out what was going on. It's actually not so wrong. The aircraft is usually divided into several zones. Each of them normally has its own air conditioning system controller. These gadgets look similar to home thermostat panels, except every panel has separate dial settings for each cabin zone. So there can totally be slightly different temperatures depending on where you're sitting on the plane. But crew members mostly set the temperature somewhere between 71 degrees Fahrenheit and 75 degrees Fahrenheit to make you feel at home. This is the temp you're most likely to set on your AC at home, right? And because all people have different body temperatures, the airplane crew mostly aims for the lower end of that spectrum, especially during morning and afternoon flights in the summer. Feeling a bit chilly is definitely better than sweating, as stuffy air makes it harder for passengers to breathe. And those who have motion sickness might feel even worse in a warm temperature while flying through turbulence. Conditioned air from the cabin also goes into the cargo hold in the belly of the plane. It gets a little cooler by the time it reaches there. Plus, the cargo area is less insulated than the cabin, so it's mostly around 44 degrees Fahrenheit in a Boeing 767 cargo hold. The bulk area where pets are traveling can get as warm as 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Depending on the plane's position, it comes from three main sources. When a plane is parked at the gate, it often uses air from the ground. This air, called preconditioned air (PCA), comes from a big air conditioning machine on the ground. You might notice a big yellow tube connected to the plane. This is how the ground air gets inside. Sometimes a gas-powered air car can be used instead. Ground air is usually powered by electricity, which is cheaper, cleaner, and quieter than running the plane's engines. But it doesn't always keep the cabin cool enough, especially on hot days or if the tube gets kinked. Cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, which have very hot weather, have some of the best ground air systems in the US to handle the heat. The second source of air aboard is the APU, or Auxiliary Power Unit. It's like a mini engine in the tail of the plane. It's the second option for cooling or heating the cabin, especially if ground air isn't available. The APU can work even on the hottest days. During quick stops, the APU might stay on the whole time to keep the air inside comfortable. If the plane is preparing to leave the gate, the APU gets switched on just before the ground air is disconnected. The plane's main engines can also provide air for the cabin. This happens when the engines are running, usually after pushback or during the flight. The engines can keep the cabin cool or warm while also managing the plane's pressurization. If the cabin feels too hot or cold, pilots can fix it if they start the engines early. If not, they can use other sources of air. This might not always work, especially when the temperatures are going up and planes get extra hot just sitting on the runway. One flight attendant shares the story of how she felt hot, dizzy, confused, and then blacked out aboard. Another flight in Florida was delayed an hour because it was 93 degrees inside the cabin. The gate agent told the passengers they had to wait for it to drop to at least 85 degrees to board the plane safely. The sun wasn't even up yet at that time. Sadly, the external AC units and the auxiliary-powered cooling systems don't always work properly because of maintenance issues. You can increase your chances of feeling comfortable on the flight if you look up the flight number and what type of plane it uses. Newer planes will have more advanced onboard technology. Some will even have temperature regulation by now. So you'll only have to fight a couple of neighbors to get to the temperature you prefer. But then there's also the cost control problem. Some airlines make their pilots save money on fuel and maintenance and won't let them use the auxiliary power unit and other engines while the plane is at the gate or on the runway. If they use too much fuel for AC on the ground, they might have to refuel later on. Another big problem with hot weather is how it affects takeoff. Planes are very heavy and gravity pulls them down to the ground. To get into the sky, they need lift, which is the force that opposes the weight of the airplane and holds it in the air. When the air gets hotter, it expands, which means there are fewer air molecules to push the plane upward. For every rise of 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, an airplane loses about 1% of its lift. So, in really hot weather, it can be much harder for planes to take off, and if it gets too hot, it might even be impossible. The problem is especially tricky at airports in high places, where the air is already thinner, and at airports with short runways, which give planes less time to speed up. For example, at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a plane might need a runway that's 6,500 feet long to take off. But if it's 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the same plane would need 8,200 feet of runway. In 2018, because of a heat wave in London, they had to remove passengers from 14 flights. It happened at London City Airport, which has shorter runways than other airports in the area. So they have to take off at a steeper angle. It would have been impossible if the plane had been loaded to the max, and they would have had to use a lot of extra fuel to make it fly. On one flight, they had to ask 20 passengers to stay behind. Since no one volunteered not to fly to Ibiza, they had to choose them at random. This made the plane lighter and let it take off safely. Scientists have also noticed that headwinds that help the plane take off have slowed down by about 2.3 knots every decade. It reduced the maximum takeoff weight for planes. If you're more worried about the cold than the heat, there's some good news for you. Since planes fly at almost 40,000 feet above the ground, they can perfectly survive freezing temps of around negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit. They keep the fuel warm on the ground, and once the plane is flying, the engine heats it up, so it works perfectly even in the icy skies. Cold air actually helps planes fly better because it's denser than warm air, which means they can take off more quickly and fly more efficiently. But cold weather has its challenges, like ice and snow. If snow or ice sticks to important parts of the plane, like the wings, it can mess up the smooth airflow that helps the plane fly. To fix this, ground staff sprays the wings with heated antifreeze liquid to melt the snow and ice. When the plane is flying, the wings stay ice-free because the engine's hot air warms them up and the plane's speed prevents snow from sticking.
The first guy crazy enough to try flying in anything electric was a French dude, like 140 years ago. The main problem back then, batteries weren't exactly long-lasting or powerful. Apple, Tesla, Samsung, modern batteries last ages. Well, not really. Even the biggest electric car battery couldn't keep a plane in the air, not for long anyway. Right now, 1 pound of airplane fuel has almost 60 times more energy than a regular battery. They would need to make the fuel tank 60 times bigger and fill it with batteries. But batteries are heavy, so you'd need to make the electric airplane more powerful to handle the weight. So then you need even more batteries, which would mean more weight. So you need to make an even stronger… you get the picture. But engineers are trying to find a balance. In 1973, 2 of them put an electric engine on a glider, and it flew for 14 minutes. Not really long enough to fly anywhere, but it was still the first manned electric aircraft flight ever. A few years later, one stayed in the air for 35 minutes. Its electric engine had only 3.5 horsepower, and its battery was borrowed from a Hughes 500 helicopter. The roof of the airplane had solar panels on it, but how much charge are you going to get in 35 minutes? Things are a lot easier when you're talking about pilotless planes. Mostly, they're just way lighter. No human, no chair, no doors or extra windows, zippo. NASA's Pathfinder set a world record for an altitude of 71,000 feet. No jet engines, no fuel, just a pretty strong battery. In 1990, the Sunseeker 1 crossed the entire United States with an electric engine. It took 21 flights and 121 hours in the air. Most normal commercial planes do it in one go, and it only takes about 5 hours. After that, tech started getting way better. Time for the Solar Impulse. What a great name for a band. The wingspan of this giant was about the same as the Airbus A380, the largest passenger aircraft in the world. But its total weight was basically the same as an SUV. They put massive wings on it and loaded them up with solar panels. This time they really did recharge the plane as it flew around. It could stay in the air for an incredibly long time and travel huge distances. As part of its round-the-world trip, It spent almost 5 days in the air and traveled over 4,000 miles between Japan and Hawaii. Aloha! Why did it take 5 days? Because that thing only goes 45 miles per hour. That's like your grandma driving on the highway. My grandma has a lead foot. And you can't just build a plane. First, you need to pass through a tough certification process. Every screw, nut, bolt, every inch of your new plane needs to be tested for safety. That takes years. So many dreamers have gone another way. They take an existing aircraft, throw away the old gas-burning engine, and switch it out for an electric one. Electric engines are much lighter and they take up less space. But those heavy batteries more than make up for it. These upgraded planes can take off, but can only fly short distances, which is amazing. Jet planes emit about 1 billion tons of CO2 a year. They're a major player in the pollution game. But half of all flights in the world are less than 500 miles long. It's one thing to get a giant plane in the air to travel from New York to Paris, but it's totally different if you only need to fly New York to DC or Seattle to Vancouver. They're only a few hundred miles, but they use some of the same planes. It's crazy. They literally take off, gain the right altitude, and immediately begin their descent. That's like driving to your own mailbox in a tank. Each hour in the air costs the airlines thousands and pumps a bunch of CO2 into the atmosphere. So let's do it. Step 1. Replace the fuel-munching planes with electric ones. It'll be cheaper for everyone, quieter, and cleaner. Done. Just one problem. Electric planes can only take 1 to 2 passengers at a time. That's the pilot and co-pilot. The way forward? Build an electric plane from scratch. Aviation Alice. It might just be the first fully electric commercial aircraft, carrying 9 passengers and 2 crew members. It looks kind of like an overturned boat and has 3 propellers, 2 on the wings and 1 behind its V-shaped tail. As long as a school bus, as wide as a limo. Its secret? It's almost twice as light as a school bus. That helps the engines work less and means longer flights. It's made of composite materials, which is science talk for stuff that's not metal, basically what some boats are made of. And its batteries take up 60% of its weight. They're everywhere, in the wings, tail, beak, eyes, feathers. Just kidding. Alice has a max range of 650 miles. That's like LA to Vegas and back. And then back to Vegas one more time. Its cruising speed is only 275 miles per hour, much slower than fuel-powered planes. But the main advantage of Alice is money. 1 hour in the air costs the airline $200. That's way cheaper than even those tiny planes that millionaires use to fly to Cabo for the weekend. So what's aviation waiting for? Mostly it needs infrastructure. But that might not be such a big problem. There are almost 20,000 airports in the USA. Most of them are unused because they're just too expensive to run or because no airline wanted to bother flying there anymore. But Alice is much cheaper to maintain and it makes a lot less noise. Imagine the airport of the future. Small, stylish, quiet, and clean. Engineers want to charge Alice with mobile chargers, like an electric version of those gas trucks you see at the airport. For a 1-hour flight, Alice needs to juice up for 30 minutes. That's actually not that bad. But imagine if you were going to take a 14-hour flight on that thing. You'd be waiting at the gate for 7 hours. Alice costs $800 less per hour than other planes. But the plane itself is pretty expensive. Try $4 million. Still, that's only a bit more than one of those private jets. Alice is getting ready for a 2022 fully certified flight. That means it's only a few years before regional flights go electric, at least some of them. But if electric planes want to play in the big leagues, they need to solve that same old problem, their batteries. Modern lithium-ion batteries have serious issues. They're flammable, they lose their charge faster and faster. The more you recharge them, and the cold makes them not work as well. The next generation of batteries is lithium-sulfur batteries. They hold more power and are cleaner for the environment. But their main disadvantage is that they wear out quickly. So scientists are looking for other tech to step up. Hybrid planes might be the way of the future. That's what cars are doing more and more now. Part fuel, part battery. Airplanes will probably be the same. There are already lightweight two-seater planes that use a hybrid engine. The aircraft takes off quietly with the energy stored in its batteries. Once it's up in the air, it changes to fuel. Some engines actually charge the battery while it's working, sort of like your car battery. Electric planes aren't the only way forward. Some companies are working on biofuel planes, which run on hydro something veggie oil. But those planes are also pretty small. Probably the next big thing to hit the airline industry will be driverless planes. Computers already do a ton of the heavy lifting, and if you fly long distance, most of it's on autopilot already. Even though it's so freaky to think that there's no one up there flying your plane, most problems are caused by human error. So, no human, no errors? Most customers say they don't like the idea, but that'll probably change soon enough. Ooh, I wonder if they're gonna make AI robot cabin crew. Or what if tiny drones flew around the cabin serving drinks? This could have been one of the biggest disasters in aviation history. It was close to midnight at San Francisco International Airport when Air Canada Flight 759 approached for landing. The pilots were almost done for that day and thought they'd land as usual, but they were unaware that the airport looked different that night. Runway 28 right was open, while runway 28 left, usually parallel, was closed for maintenance, with its lights turned off. Despite having landed here before, the pilots made a critical error. Expecting to see two parallel runways, they mistook the center runway for the darkened 28 left and assumed the taxiway on the right was 28 right. What the crew didn't realize was that the taxiway wasn't empty. 4 planes were lined up there, waiting for takeoff, with more than 1,000 passengers in total, and their plane was headed straight toward them. There was a notice to airmen, which listed important details for flights, including this critical information. But these notices are long and dense, often stretching several pages, and the closure detail had been missed by the Air Canada crew. That night, the pilots were conducting a visual approach, relying on what they could see to align with the runway. This is normal in good weather, but is much harder at night. The crew had flown from Toronto and were tired after a long day. Their internal clocks were already past 3 a.m., and Canadian rules regarding pilot rest were less strict than those in the U.S. The captain had been working for nearly 19 hours without proper rest. As the plane got closer to danger, no one in the cockpit noticed they were on the wrong path. Planes approaching San Francisco often come in at a slight angle to reduce noise over the bay. It's normal for them to appear slightly off to air traffic controllers. But this added to the confusion, and the Air Canada crew kept heading toward the taxiway. When the pilots finally realized that something was off, they radioed the control tower to confirm their landing clearance. The controller, who was managing both air traffic and ground operations due to the late hour, took several seconds to respond. He cleared them to land, unaware that the plane was lined up for the wrong path. Meanwhile, the crew of one of the planes on the runway quickly radioed the tower, alerting them to the imminent danger. The tower immediately instructed the Air Canada crew to stop and go around for another attempt. The Air Canada pilots pulled up just in time, missing the parked planes by just a couple feet. The pilots, still shaken from the near miss, saved hundreds of lives. After the incident, a full investigation was conducted. Now, there are new safety measures, but there are still concerns about whether the lessons learned are enough. Recent years have seen an alarming rise in such awful close calls. Qantas Flight 32, a scheduled flight from London to Sydney via Singapore, encountered a critical emergency on November 4, 2010. Just minutes after taking off from Singapore's Changi Airport, as an Airbus A380 was flying over the Riau Islands in Indonesia, it encountered a serious problem. One of its 4 engines underwent an uncontained failure. For the next 2 hours, the crew faced a tense and difficult situation as they tried to figure out how badly the plane was damaged. The accident happened at 10:01 a.m. Singapore time. When the engine went off, pieces of it flew into the wing, damaging important systems. The fuel system was hit, causing leaks and even starting a fire in one of the fuel tanks. It also took out one of the plane's hydraulic systems, which help control things like the flaps and landing gear. It disabled the anti-lock brakes, which are crucial for safe landings. Two of the other engines started to lose power as well, and the flaps, which help control the plane's descent and speed, were damaged. Despite the harm to the aircraft, the crew realized it was still controllable. They decided to circle near Singapore for about 50 minutes while they carefully checked the condition of the aircraft. The first officer and the supervising captain then used a special landing calculator to see if they could land safely at Changi, even though the plane was 50 tons heavier than its maximum landing weight. At first, the system couldn't give them a landing distance, but after adjusting for the fact that the runway was dry, it showed they could land with only 328 feet of runway left to spare. At 11:45 a.m., the plane landed safely at Changi Airport, but because it was going about 40 miles per hour faster than usual, 4 of its tires blew out when it touched down. After landing, the crew ran into another problem. They couldn't shut off the number 1 engine. Emergency crews had to step in and put out the engine themselves. The crew had to decide whether to evacuate the plane right away because fuel was leaking near the overheated brakes, which could have caused a fire. Captain David Evans later explained that, despite the risk, it was actually safer to keep everyone on board until things settled down. The cabin crew stayed on high alert, ready to evacuate passengers immediately if the situation got worse. To make things even tougher, the plane was running on battery power, which meant they could only use one radio to communicate with emergency services. Luckily, the danger passed, and everyone was able to leave the plane calmly using a set of stairs. Everyone on board, 440 passengers and 29 crew members, got out safely. On the ground in Batam, some debris from the engine fell on a school, houses, and a car, but thankfully, everyone was okay there as well. Just a few missteps could have made that situation turn out very differently, but luckily the crew handled it like heroes. Investigators eventually found that the problem started because a small oil pipe in the engine had been poorly made, leading to the disaster. This was the first time an engine failure like this had happened on an A380. It was, and still is, the world's largest passenger plane at the time. As a result, Qantas and some other airlines temporarily grounded all of its A380 planes to ensure they were safe. Another similar incident happened with Northwest Airlines Flight 85 in 2002. The plane took off from Detroit Metropolitan Airport at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There were 4 pilots on board. About 7 hours into the flight, flying at 35,000 feet, an unexpected issue struck. The plane veered sharply, banking to the left. The pilots initially thought an engine had failed. The senior captain quickly returned to the cockpit and took manual control. An emergency was declared, and they decided to divert the flight to Anchorage. It was hard to communicate, as they were in a zone with weak signals. Eventually, they connected with another Northwest Airlines flight nearby, which relayed their emergency call to Alaska. The situation was so unusual that none of the usual emergency procedures worked. The flight crew called Northwest Airlines headquarters in Minneapolis for help, but even they couldn't find a solution. Thankfully, the pilots worked together to control the plane. They managed to steer the plane using the ailerons, and by applying more power to one engine than the other. This tricky maneuver allowed them to land safely at Anchorage. After the incident, the NTSB and Boeing investigated once again. The NTSB investigator described it as a dramatic event that required careful examination. They found a crack in the power control module for the rudder, which had caused part of its metal housing to break. This break was unusual because it affected the module's outer casing, not just the inside parts. The NTSB concluded that the crack led to what's known as a rudder hardover, where the rudder is pushed to its maximum position and stays there, causing the sudden dangerous turn. All of these horrible situations show how fatigue, miscommunication, and outdated procedures can lead to disasters. But the sheer number of them in history, especially in U.S. airports, raises the question of whether enough lessons have truly been learned.
Airplanes are unanimously accepted as the world's safest transport. The chances of a crash are super slim, but sometimes you don't even need to board it to say goodbye to your friends and family forever. In Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, someone lost their life after being literally sucked into the running engine of a plane. KLM Royal Dutch Airlines shared the details, revealing that the unfortunate incident involved a plane scheduled to fly to Denmark. KLM confirmed that during a routine operation, a person found themselves in the path of a running aircraft engine, leading to a fatal outcome. They also mentioned they're offering support to the passengers and staff who witnessed the horrifying event. As of now, there's been no word on who the victim was or whether they were a passenger, an airport employee, or just someone nearby. But what we need to learn from this tragic incident is that it's essential to keep a great distance from the turbine. Yeah, traveling is not only about relaxation and positive emotions. It can be about ultimate danger, and even the simplest actions can put your life at risk. I won't make it long. Just remember one thing. Never, ever pose for photos in proximity to the rocks. A 20-year-old guy named Roni Joshua Simanjutak was swept out to sea by a huge wave while trying to snap some vacation pics with his friends. They were all just hanging out on the beach in East Java, Indonesia, when Roni decided it would be a good idea to take a picture with the crashing waves at Kedung Tumpang Beach. Things started off pretty chill. The water was calm, and some of his friends were swimming near the massive rocks. But then, out of nowhere, the calm waters turned chaotic. As Roni poses for the camera, a massive wave suddenly rises behind him. It hits him hard, knocking him down onto the rocks and dragging him into the rough surf. At first, some onlookers laugh as he stumbles, but that quickly changes when he disappears under the water. Later in the video, the person filming zooms in on something floating away, which people believe might be Roni. It's a gut-wrenching sight, as it appears to be his body being pulled out to sea. Authorities were looking for him for some time, yet all was in vain. The waves measured between 6.5 and 14 feet, making the rescue efforts really tough, according to a spokesperson from the Indonesia's National Search and Rescue Agency. In October 2024, Roni was still missing. Ew, what's that? Not gonna lie, this flesh-resembling spot looks disgusting, at least to me. It's a lion's mane jellyfish, and not only does it look off, but it's also terribly dangerous. One touch can get you into serious trouble. Now, don't get too scared. You're unlikely to see this anywhere except for Australia. Lion's mane jellyfish are among the largest in the world, with some growing over a meter wide and having tentacles that can stretch over 32 feet. These jellyfish can deliver a sting that brings instant pain, although it's not life-threatening. Scientists claim that while lion's manes aren't the most toxic jellyfish out there, their sting can certainly hurt, especially for kids. Also, when traveling to exotic locations, make sure to keep your ears open, especially if you know there are volcanoes nearby. The pulsating sound can tell you beforehand that there's a volcano ready to erupt. A couple's trip to Iceland took an unexpected turn when they had to evacuate Blue Lagoon due to a volcano warning. They thought they were in for a relaxing day at the famous spa when the alarms suddenly went off because of nearby volcanic activity. When the couple checked in, the staff warned them about a possible eruption and told them to gather their things if they heard alarms, but they figured it was just a precaution. So, when the alarm actually sounded, the couple was completely taken aback. There was smoke, lava, ashes. They saw it all, and they even managed to share a video on TikTok, which got 9.3 million views. Thankfully, they made it back to their cruise ship. The couple was on an epic Royal Caribbean cruise that stopped in Iceland as part of a 9-month global journey. Good news, according to the travelers, the staff at Blue Lagoon made the evacuation quick and calm. So they're real professionals. The eruption happened on August 22, 2024, on the Reykjanes Peninsula, and marked the 6th volcanic event in the area since December. Now, I know that water is life, but not all forms of life are friendly. Some of them can be pretty hostile. A swimmer had a super chill run-in with a giant eel while taking a dip off the coast of Jupiter, Florida. So what should you do if you see one? Just back up. Don't get too excited or nervous. Just back up without drawing too much attention to you. The eel in question wasn't being aggressive at all. It was just curious. But in general, moray eels, and that's the one they saw, can bite if startled. Thankfully, their bites aren't lethal. But anyways, who wants to be bitten in the middle of a peaceful swim? Boy, look at that! This lady's feet are purple. If you wonder how this is related to trips, well, that's simple. The lady got her feet and ankles like that during her trip to Mexico, and this looks by no means healthy. So what exactly happened to her? Initially, she thought it was just a bad sunburn, but nope, it turned out to be a severe allergic reaction. These can throw a wrench in your vacation plans, so make sure to pack a health kit with all the needed meds, especially those that might be hard to find where you're going. When traveling, it's also smart to be cautious about what you eat. Contaminated food or drinks can lead to some pretty unpleasant issues. The main tip here is to stick to hot foods, which are usually safe, as well as packaged snacks and bottled or canned drinks. You should keep an eye on both your health and your belongings while traveling, because even the rich and famous get robbed easily. The 2024 Paris Olympics grabbed attention not just for the sports, but also for a high-profile theft that left a Qatari princess empty-handed when her pricey Hermes Birkin bags went missing. This incident, reported by French media, happened on July 28 while she was traveling on a TGV train from Nice to Paris, getting ready for the Olympics. Al-Mayasa bint Hamad Al Thani, who is either the Emir of Qatar's sister-in-law or sister, lost her stash of luxury bags, which were said to be filled with diamonds and expensive watches. She was traveling with just her maid and no security, which raised eyebrows about her safety measures for such valuable items. After realizing the bags were gone, staff on the train tried to help, stopping for about 20 minutes at the Toulon station to look for them, but they came up empty. Authorities believe the thief might have escaped in Toulon, and the local criminal court is launching an investigation. French officials were tight-lipped about the investigation, and there were no updates on the value of the stolen items. Meanwhile, the French National Railway Company reminded everyone that they aren't responsible for lost or stolen belongings. It's up to passengers to keep an eye on their stuff. A travel influencer had quite the jaw-dropping experience when he stumbled upon what he dubbed a Jurassic Park dinosaur, chilling in his hotel pool during a trip to Bali. He captured in a video a massive reptile making itself at home in his pool in Kangu. The influencer in question, Daniel Thomason from Norway, later found out it was actually a water lizard related to the Komodo dragon, but significantly smaller and less dangerous. He was shocked to learn it was just a baby, since the adults can grow up to 6.5 feet long. Komodo dragons are the largest lizards on the planet, mostly found on Komodo Island and a few nearby areas in Indonesia. They can grow up to 10 feet long and weigh around 300 pounds.
The plane broke into 3 large pieces and crashed onto the hillside, scattering parts all over the snowy ground. The wings ripped off, and the main body of the aircraft split into 2 parts. Flames crackled from what was left of the airplane. 7 out of 9 crew members survived the crash. They were all part of the 1946 U.S. mission to map the Antarctic continent. There were 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 people to do the job. They only had 2 months of summer down there before the weather got too bad. USS Pine Island took 3 seaplanes on their mission. One of the planes, called George 1, had a crew of 9 people. They went on their first 10-hour mission. Later, when it was time for the second flight, the weather got worse, with stormy seas and low visibility. But they decided to take the chance and fly anyway. It was supposed to be an epic adventure, and even the captain of Pine Island joined the expedition. The pilot, Ralph "Frenchie" LeBlanc was very experienced and not worried about the weather. The plane was tied to some small boats, but the waves were so strong that the lines holding it were damaging the plane's metal body. Crew members had to attach 4 special rocket boosters, called jet-assisted takeoff bottles, to help the plane lift off. It managed to do so after a run of about 5 miles, but got straight into a blinding snowstorm. James "Robbie" Robbins was just 19 years old back then, but already had 1,500 hours of experience as a radar operator in that type of seaplane. He once successfully flew 9 hours through thick fog and clouds in Greenland, so he trusted his abilities. The radar showed a mountain range 20 miles ahead and icebergs spread out, and it was all correct. They had to stay low to take photos for mapping, and it was impossible in bad weather. So the pilot decided to turn the plane around to head back to the ship. Suddenly, the plane hit something. At the time, they didn't know what it was, but later they realized it was a snow-covered ridge that was hidden and couldn't be seen on radar. The loud bang shocked everyone on board. The pilot and co-pilot quickly pushed the plane's controls to try to lift it back into the sky. But just a few seconds later, the fuel tank in the front of the plane blew up. Collapsing with a ridge likely cracked one of the fuel tanks, so the gas started to leak. The fumes from the gas might have been set on fire by an electrical spark or the plane's hot engines. The blast was so strong that it broke the plane into 3 parts. The pilot was hurt and stuck upside down in the burning front part of the aircraft. Some of the other men were also badly injured. Some crawled out of the wreckage, and others had been thrown out into the snow during the crash. Most of them couldn't even remember the bang or the impact. The crew managed to pull the trapped pilot out of the wreckage and put him into a sleeping bag inside the back part of the plane. They also tried to help Frederick Williams, who was severely injured. They placed him on a piece of debris to keep him still and wrapped him in blankets to keep him warm. Unfortunately, even though they did their best to take care of them, Williams passed away a few hours later. Sadly, the navigator and the radio man didn't survive the crash either. 3 crew members had only 1 blanket, so they took turns staying in the middle where it was warmer. For the first 3 days, the weather was really bad. It snowed a lot, and the sky was super dark and cloudy. The crew started looking through the wreckage for anything useful. Near what used to be the back part of the plane, they found 3 big boxes of pemmican. It's a kind of emergency food that has everything you need to stay healthy, but it's not the most delicious food on Earth. Each box had about 100 paper cups filled with this special food. They also found better food in the flight rations. There were steaks, potatoes, canned veggies, bread, butter, salt, pepper, sugar, canned milk, a few cookies, and even 2 big cans of peanut butter. They had enough food to last for a while, and they figured the pemmican would help them get through the long, dark winter if necessary. All of the fresh food was hidden in the snow, where the kitchen used to be, so they had to dig it out. They got most of the sugar by licking it off the snow and separating it by taste. The crew also found a small 2-burner stove in the emergency supplies, but they didn't have any fuel. Luckily, the plane had some fuel left in the tanks, so they tapped one of the lines and had enough to last a long time. They kept the burners constantly on to melt snow to fill 2 or 3 water holders that held about 4 or 5 gallons each. It seemed like it took 15 or 20 pots of snow to fill just 1 cup of water. After 3 days, the weather got better, the sky was clear, and the sun was shining brightly. From where they were, they could see the ocean down the hill. While exploring the wreckage, they found more sleeping bags, a camera with film, and other supplies like a sled and a life raft made for 9 people. Days went by, and the sun never went down. Huge, hungry seagulls hanging out right next to the wreck were getting on everyone's nerves. To distract themselves a bit, the crew played an old Navy game called Salvo. It's like a battleships game for 2 players, where your task is to find and defeat all the ships of your rival. They also took some photos of everyone and the wreck from different angles with a Brownie box camera they had on the plane. The radar man painted big yellow letters on the airplane's wings with the names of the deceased crew members, to make sure rescuers knew what had happened. On the 13th day, a rescue plane finally showed up. Everyone shouted, waved, and did everything to get the pilot's attention, but the plane didn't stop and kept flying. 2 hours later, it came back, and Robbins, in a hurry, threw fuel onto a pile of flammable stuff to set it on fire. The bang was so big, it burned his eyebrows, but it worked. The plane turned and flew toward them, wiggling its wings as a sign it saw them. The pilot dropped a note attached to a weight. It said, "If you can walk to the lake, make a circle. If not, form a straight line." The lake was 10 miles away, but they knew they had no choice but to get there, and so they made a circle, signaling that they were ready for rescue. Then they got to work. They stacked sleeping bags on the sled and placed their injured pilot on top. Robbins took a compass from the crashed plane and attached it to the sled's handlebars to help guide them. 3 men pulled the sled while another walked behind, making sure they stayed on track. The snow was so deep that they often sank up to their waists. The journey only got easier when they reached solid ground. So it took them 24 hours to walk the 10 miles to the shore. As they got close, a thick fog rolled in, so they couldn't see the rescue plane. But the pilot started the engines and the crew followed the sound. Soon, 2 rescuers arrived in a raft and helped them paddle out to the waiting plane. They climbed aboard and flew back to their ship, the Pine Island. All the survivors were taken to the USS Philippine Sea and later returned home. For 6 of the 9 men who crashed on Thurston Island, life continued.
Our estimated flight time today will be 3 days. Future passengers of the world's longest aircraft, Airlander 10, won't get to their destinations quickly, but they will surely do it in style. Nicknamed the Flying Bum for its unconventional exterior, this plane will feature plush ensuite bedrooms, an onboard altitude bar, and glass flooring with horizon-to-horizon views. Airlander 10 won't even need an airport. It can take off and land from any flat surface, be it land, sand, water, or ice, using pneumatic skids. It will also be friendly to the environment with less emissions and is supposed to become the safest form of air travel. This 300-foot-long engineering marvel is part airship, part helicopter, and part plane. Other aircraft use one of the various methods to maintain flight: buoyancy, vertical thrust, or lift. Blimps, helicopters, and planes mostly rely on buoyancy, vertical thrust, and lift respectively. But our bum plane incorporates all 3 of these principles. First comes buoyancy. Airlander uses a massive amount of helium, a material less dense than air. It helps aircraft like blimps and zeppelins take off, just like how a helium-filled balloon ascends. And because helium is buoyant on its own, our hero can float effortlessly. Airlander stores its helium in several compartments for safety and also has 4 325 horsepower engines and requires way less power compared to conventional aircraft, like the Boeing 787, which makes it more energy efficient. But this buoyant aircraft is limited in payload, up to 10 tons. Its constructors could make the hull bigger to place more helium in it, but our plane is already the bulkiest in the world, so that would be too much. To help with this, the Airlander 10 is equipped with 2 vertical thrusters, like those on helicopters. They direct the air downwards, lifting the aircraft. And then there's lift, which plays a crucial role in the aerodynamics of flight. To get lift, you need air zipping over and around the wing, creating a force. Even though the Airlander might not have monster engines like a big jetliner, its huge hull gives plenty of space for air to do its thing and help it lift off. This unique hybrid aircraft has run several successful test voyages, so you can consider it a real thing. It will be a customizable transformer, good for passenger travel, cargo transport, extended flight operations, or scientific goals. Some of its configurations will be able to stay in flight for up to 5 days without stopping. It could be really useful for research missions. And the designers plan to build an even bigger Airlander 50 with a capacity of 50 tons of payload. In the early days of aviation, there were no computer simulations to test the design, so there were some pretty crazy plane models built. Italian designer Gianni Caproni wanted to create an aircraft to transport 100 passengers across the Atlantic with comfort and style. His brainchild, Ka-60, had 9 wings arranged in 3 sets of 3. It had 8 engines, all serviced by mechanics in flight. There were panoramic windows along both sides of the long cabin for passengers sitting in 2 wide rows to enjoy the views of the world below. It had a rounded nose, an integral flight deck, and a streamlined seaplane hull. Once the plane was finished, the pilot was doing test runs on Lake Maggiore to balance the hydroplane. Then, there was probably a boat in its path, or the pilot went too fast, and the plane took off when it wasn't supposed to. It broke up. By the time Caproni arrived at the lake, the pilot had been rescued, but trying to pull the wreckage out only made things worse. So, the plane never got to cross the Atlantic. The French engineers went even further and designed a plane with a body modeled after birds and named it Duck. It was supposed to have a steam engine to power a single tractor propeller to the front of its rotund body. The pilot and landing gear were supposed to be attached by cables and frame underneath the body. This weirdly looking aircraft had an official name, but everyone remembered it as the Flying Pancake because of its saucer-like shape. This design was supposed to make it possible to land and take off in tight areas where regular planes can't fit. The prototype was a success with low takeoff and landing speeds, and the disc-shaped design helped generate lift. The engineers received funding for an improved version, but it came with flaws. When they were corrected, there was no longer a need for this quirky plane. German aeronautical engineer Alexander Lippisch came up with the Aerodyne. It looks like the rear part of an airplane after cutting the whole thing in half, but it could fly on its own. It was considered a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, the same group as helicopters. It combined lift and thrust using a single unit and flow channel, like a ducted fan. Flaps at the end of the fan would divert the outflowing air. The first Dornier Aerodyne flight took off in 1972. Even though it was a success, the authorities lost interest in it and shelved the project. The Pregnant Guppy, also known as Frankenplane because it was made of parts of other airplanes, has helped NASA on its way to the moon. Back in the 1960s, they had a problem shipping rockets from the West Coast to Cape Canaveral in Florida. Taking them by water through the Panama Canal took 2 to 3 weeks, and fragile parts came dented and corroded. And that's when John Conroy came up with a solution. His friend had Boeings he had bought but didn't find use for them. Conroy decided to modify the planes by adding a larger cargo bay on top of the fuselage. He didn't receive funding from NASA for his idea, but he never gave up and mortgaged his own house, sold his car, and invested all his savings into his project to prove it would work out. He borrowed the fuel to fly the prototype to Alabama. The plane flew perfectly and impressed everyone. The Super Guppy, as they started calling it, was successfully transporting rocket stages for NASA's Gemini program. Conroy built a total of 25 modifications of his aircraft to fit even larger and heavier equipment. The Edgeley Optica EA-7 might look like a funky, futuristic Dragonfly aircraft, but it was designed in the mid-70s for low and slow surveillance or sightseeing missions. It features a helicopter-like cockpit mounted ahead of a ducted fan motor and an impressive 270-degree field of view. Its large ducted fan was running quietly inside and outside the cockpit. It gained renewed interest in the 21st century for border patrol, wildlife management, and fire spotting missions. But because of lack of funding, there were only 5 out of the 22 built aircraft remaining airworthy worldwide. Have you ever seen a plane with 2 fuselages of differing sizes? The Rutan Model 202 Boomerang stands out as a multi-engine aircraft built this way to minimize the risks of engine failure. Unlike conventional planes, even if one of its engines were to malfunction, the Boomerang remains easily controllable thanks to its innovative design, which effectively manages asymmetric thrust. This design makes the Boomerang faster and more efficient. This plane was never designed for commercial use, but as a private plane for up to 5 people. You can tell that this short Skyvan was built for practical purposes without caring too much about aesthetics, just by looking at it. And that's how this general-purpose aircraft got its nicknames like Flying Shoebox and The Shed. Despite all the mocking, the Skyvan has served well over the years. It's been around since its first flight in the 1960s, still transferring cargo and passengers today. It can seat 19 people and has a van-like large rear door for loading and unloading freight. That's why it's perfect for short-haul flights, activities like skydiving, and much more. Let's face it, airports can be pretty annoying, but the most annoying thing about them is probably having to take the laptop out of your backpack and put it in a separate bin while going through the security check. But, of course, they wouldn't make us do those extra moves if there wasn't a good reason for it. Laptops are dense, and X-rays can't penetrate them, so it's easy to hide something dangerous there. If the device is out and on its own in a separate bin, it's easier for the scanners to capture something dangerous. Most airplanes are white. Is there a benefit to choosing this exact color? No, white paint doesn't make a place feel lighter. Neither does it save money on painting. Here are the actual reasons for the choice: safety, efficiency, and comfort. The first airplanes had a metallic color, but the problem with metal is that it's prone to corrosion, so painting it is a great way to protect an airplane from corrosion. White is favored for several reasons. First, planes fly high above the clouds and are exposed to sunlight a lot. White is the color that absorbs the least heat, and white planes get heated less. Also, sunlight makes the paint fade away. A colorful airplane will have its paint fade very fast and will require repainting. And repainting is costly, so painting aircraft white is a more lasting choice. Also, any damage is more easily noticed on a white surface. So that's one more point for the white color. We always board from the left side of the plane, every single time, no exceptions. For some reason, the right side just doesn't seem to be an option. Yes, that's done on purpose. First, the captain usually sits on the left. This way, it's easier for the pilot to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge. Also, aircraft are fueled and loaded with baggage on the right side. Since people board the plane from the left, the crew can do their job undisturbed, and there's no danger to passengers. Consistency with the choice of a side helps to make everything work more effectively. Since everyone always enters from the left, all jet bridges are designed to get attached to the left side of the airplane. If every airplane had the freedom to choose the side, it would create an additional mess for the logistics behind the process. There are more questions popping up, like what does this black triangle drawn above one of the windows mean? Apparently, it marks the seat from which the view of the airplane's wing is the best. It's needed for the crew to find the spot as fast as possible if, in case of an emergency, they need to inspect the engines, slats, or flaps. This mark saves a lot of time. Next, the rows aren't well aligned with the windows. This is business. Originally, all planes are designed with rows and windows lining up perfectly. But when an airline buys a jet, they add some additional seats, squeezing them closer together. This way, they have more seats, which means more passengers, so they can sell more tickets. But you get less space for your legs and might miss out on a window. Also, all windows have rounded corners, and this is done for safety reasons. There used to be planes with squared windows, but those caused crashes because such windows couldn't withstand high-altitude pressures. At high altitudes, external atmospheric pressure is lower than the pressure inside the cabin. So, there's a big difference in pressure inside and outside the airplane, and this creates stress. Without windows, this stress flows smoothly through the material. A squared window becomes an obstacle, and the flow of stress needs to change direction. The pressure builds up in the corners, leading to cracks. As a result, such windows break. Oval windows allow the stress to flow more smoothly without disrupting them too much and preventing stress concentration. So, oval windows are safer. The glass used in production is stretched acrylic glass, and there are 3 separate panes of it. This is done as a security measure in case there is a breach. This way, at least one pane will remain intact at all times. Have you ever noticed those small holes in the windows? The tiny hole is actually only in the pane that's in the middle. Its task is to regulate the huge pressure difference inside and outside the cabin. This way, the outer pane can handle the load. If the outer pane breaks, the middle one, even though there's a hole in it, will be able to keep the window intact. Also, that hole prevents the windows from fogging up. Now, let's say you want to relax and watch a movie. Luckily, there's a pair of headphones. But they're weird. They have a two-pronged plug. No, this is not some kind of advanced technology. This is a witty move to prevent theft. If you can't use them anywhere else but on the airplane, no one will have the urge to snatch them away. Outside the airplane, they're basically useless. And then they bring food. There are people who love airplane food and people who aren't very fond of it. But most will agree that food does taste different in the air. Turns out, it's actually a thing. Low air pressure, lack of humidity, and background noise that we have at high altitudes change the functioning of our taste buds. They become less sensitive to sweet and salty foods, so airlines have to use more seasoning. Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone opened an airplane door accidentally? This wouldn't end well. It would be very dangerous to say the least. More specifically, soon there would be a lack of oxygen in the cabin. But gladly, no one can open that door accidentally. The pressure difference between inside and outside makes it almost impossible. It would take some immense strength to open it. The doors are designed to open on their own in case of an emergency. Speaking of safety, during takeoff and landing, the crew dims the light in the cabin. This is done for a good reason. This way, in case of emergency, you will see everything more clearly. Your eyes will get used to the darkness, and you'll have an easier time evacuating. Now, about pilots. They always wear those cool sunglasses, but the purpose is not to look cooler. They're used to protect the eyes. Throughout their career, pilots have to take care of their vision, but the problem is that it's not an easy task when you're a pilot. The damaging solar radiation that our sun emits is filtered out by the Earth's atmosphere, so the sunlight isn't very damaging to you if you spend most of your time on the ground. But it's different up in the sky. There's less air there, and the brightness is way higher. And with every 1,000 feet of elevation, the solar radiation is around 5% stronger. On average, aircraft fly at an altitude of 35,000 feet. This means that the amount of UV radiation is 175% greater than on the ground. This is very damaging to any person's vision. The large amount of time pilots spend in the air makes them vulnerable to different eye problems. And having eye problems can cost a pilot their career. So, wearing sunglasses is a crucial thing for them, and these sunglasses must be of the best quality. They should minimize the impact of sunlight and withstand UV rays, providing 100% protection for the eyes. Also, they can't be polarized, since polarization can mess with the perception of the cockpit displays. They should provide the best clarity, decrease eye fatigue, and minimize color deformation, so that pilots can see just like they would without their sunglasses on. There are so many ways to make airplanes safer. For example, they could have ejector seats so that every passenger could be rescued. In reality, though, it's way more difficult than it sounds. If there were ejector seats, your trip would be very different. Everyone would have to be strapped into a seat with a harness to make sure they wouldn't fall out of it. Then you'd have to wear an oxygen mask all throughout the flight. An emergency can occur at any time. Then, ejection in itself is a big pressure on your body. Even fighter pilots who are physically prepared can still suffer severe injuries. For an average person, this process wouldn't be safe. So, however cool it sounds, ejection seats aren't very practical and are actually quite dangerous. Okay, well, at least they could have a parachute for each passenger. But this wouldn't be very useful either. Parachutes only sound like they can save many lives. First, having them isn't efficient. They're very costly and heavy. So a plane would need to burn more fuel while flying if there were parachutes on board. It would all be worth it, though, if parachutes could make an actual difference to the safety of people, but they can't. Commercial planes aren't designed in a way that would make it safe to jump out of them, especially with a couple hundred people on board. Next, passengers aren't trained to use them. Imagine there's an emergency. The plane is falling, and 200 people are trying to deal with a parachute for the first time in their lives. It would be an absolute mess. Lastly, it's not safe to jump from the high altitudes planes fly at. So, oxygen masks, life vests, and boats are the best life-saving equipment, and every plane has those. You know those huge engines that they have under the wings? Yeah, look at them. They don't look safe at all. Birds can get pulled in, and it actually happens. They could at least put a grate in front of the rotating parts to prevent birds from getting in there. Turns out those engines pull inside huge amounts of air, and this is crucial for them to work properly. The more air gets swallowed, the more air gets compressed, mixed with fuel, and burned. And then, more of it gets pushed out from the other side, keeping the plane going. A cover at the front would be a barrier, significantly reducing the air inflow that is crucial for the proper work of the engines, and this would endanger the passengers. But hey, don't be too upset. Birds fly way lower than planes do, so they're only in danger for a few minutes at the beginning of the flight while the plane is climbing altitude, and at the very end when the plane is landing. So very few of them ever get pulled in, and if they do, it's never a threat to the engines or passenger safety. Planes also don't change up the gears like cars do, so technically they can't go backwards. The reason for this is that planes don't need to go backward. They can just turn around and move in the opposite direction, but face first. The only time when they need to move backward is when they have to get to the gate. And for those times, there's help. Pushback tractors. Those are small vehicles that can connect to airplanes and move them in the required direction. Watch out for those next time you fly. But technically speaking, planes can go backward if the engines start pushing the air forward instead of backward. But this is very dangerous for everyone around. One of the very few cases when they do it is during landing, to help slow the airplane down. There are cameras on the outside that let pilots navigate taxiways better. They come in especially handy during tricky maneuvering. But do you know there are also cameras in airplane cabins? You can relax, there are no cameras in the lavatories. But yes, they are there in the cabin, and for security reasons only. Flight attendants monitor them to see what's not visible from their own seats. Of course, flight attendants can check everything just by walking down the cabin, and that's exactly what they do most of the time. So, cameras are mostly used during takeoff and landing, when everyone, including flight attendants, is supposed to sit down, as those are the most dangerous stages of a flight. Notice that it's exactly during these stages that the rules are particularly strict. All electronic devices should be turned off or put on airplane mode, and big electronic devices should be stored away. Window blinds should be raised and tables folded. Seats should be put in the upright position. You need to have your seatbelt fastened, and so on. This is all done for safety and to ensure fast evacuation in case of emergency. So let's discuss these rules. Airplane mode on electronic devices is important to make sure that the signals that devices transmit don't interfere with the plane's electronic systems. If they interfere, they will block the radio's frequency pilots need to get their instructions. Do you remember that clicking sound a speaker makes right before your cell phone gets a call if the two devices are close? This is the sound pilots might hear while communicating with air traffic control. Now, putting away large devices like laptops is important because they might turn into obstacles if you need to get out of the plane fast in case of an emergency. All the pathways should be as clear as possible. This is why everything should be packed away, seats straightened, and tables folded. There should be nothing blocking anyone's way. And lastly, window blinds. The lights on the airplane get turned off too. Those two things are done to make sure your eyes get used to the natural light outside the aircraft. Imagine it's night, some emergency happens, and the lights that were left on suddenly go off. People need to evacuate as fast as possible, but their eyes aren't adjusted to the dark yet, and they can't see anything. This will slow everyone down. If the lights inside are out, people get used to the darkness and will be able to evacuate faster. The same goes for window blinds. If it's day and they are raised, people are used to the light outside and can evacuate faster. Another reason is that when blinds are raised during landing, people outside can see what's going on inside the plane. For example, if there's fire or smoke and where exactly. This way, they can plan the evacuation process better. Also, you might have noticed black triangles drawn above some windows on the airplane. These triangles mark the seats from which the view on the airplane's wings is the best. It's needed for the crew to find the spot as fast as possible if, in case of emergency, they need to inspect the engines, slats, or flaps. This little triangle saves the plane crew a lot of time. We do talk about emergencies a lot, but they really don't happen often. It's more dangerous to drive a car than to fly by plane, and most of us get in the car every day. Yet, the fear of flying is still very much out there, and people can get superstitious. In many cultures, the number 13 is considered unlucky. So, airplane companies that often fly to those destinations just omit row 13. It's a small thing to do, but it can spare a few anxious passengers who happen to sit in row 13. In other cultures, like in Italy and Brazil, 17 is the unlucky number, and some aircraft have both rows 13 and 17 missing. In airplanes that fly to China, they can often omit row 14 instead. An engine explodes during takeoff. The water injection system is switched off, and communication is lost. Now, this doomed plane faces the imminent threat of crashing into Athens or a hill. Will the captain be able to defy all odds and save over 400 lives on board? Stay tuned. It's 2 in the afternoon. A Boeing 747 starts rolling down the runway, picking up speed. Just as Captain Sifis Migadis lifts the nose of the aircraft, he's surprised by a loud bang. He has no idea what's just happened, but he's left with no options. The fully loaded plane is moving too fast to stop on the short runway space still left. The airplane begins its risky takeoff, and it's now heading straight for downtown Athens, which is absolutely crowded on a hot summer evening in August 9, 1978. After the loud explosion, a flight attendant in the back takes the intercom and warns the crew about the catastrophic failure of engine number 3 located on the right side of the airplane. The flight attendant says, "I think we're screwed." And here's an honest, "Yeah, I know." The original plan of the Olympic Airways Flight 411 was a direct shot from Athens to New York. But now, this massive 370-ton jumbo jet simply doesn't have enough power to keep going up. The stress is through the roof. The flight is fully loaded with 18 crew members and 400 passengers, who are mostly US citizens returning from their Greek summer vacation. Little do they know that the pilot still has to face 4 major problems in a 93-second period to ensure everyone stays alive. The first issue has to do with water injection. You see, this Boeing has 4 engines. Engine number 3 has just exploded, and engine number 2 is operating with reduced power after maintenance. So the pilot needs the remaining engines to give their all to get this plane climbing. The thing is, pushing the engines to the max creates a ton of heat. So, Captain Migadis asks the onboard flight engineer to double-check if the cooling system is on, preventing the engines from getting too hot and maintaining a safe temperature. It's a bit tricky to explain what went wrong at this point, but experts think that in the heat of the moment, the flight engineer might have gotten a little mixed up. Instead of ensuring the water injection is on, he does the opposite and switches the system off just 9 seconds after takeoff. This mistake further reduces the power in the engines, limiting the plane's ability to climb by causing a loss of 4,500 pounds of thrust. So now, the plane finds itself in a seriously bad situation, barely cruising over the rooftops at below minimum speed. The second issue with this doomed aircraft involves the landing gear. The 55-year-old pilot had already had over 30 years of experience when he was assigned to command this flight. So he decides to make a bold move by telling his co-pilot to pull up the wheels at 35 feet above the runway. This move isn't just risky, it's straight up against Boeing rules in situations like this. Pilots usually have to wait until the aircraft gains a bit more altitude to pull up the wheels, because popping those landing gear doors open for 15 seconds adds more resistance against the plane's forward motion. In other words, it basically slows the plane down, and that's why the co-pilot hesitates for a second before agreeing to break the rule. Against all odds, the 411 flight stays in the air, but the problems are far from over. This leads us to the third issue. The plane is getting dangerously close to hitting one of the oldest capital cities in the world, Athens. The flight started from Ellinikon International Airport. This was the main airport for the Greek capital for decades, and it was known as one of the trickiest and riskiest airports in the world. Picture this: 2 short runways, side by side, squeezed between the Aegean Sea and large mountains. Even though there were 2 runways, they mostly used just one, the one pointing planes straight at the center of Athens. Because of that, pilots had to make an immediate left turn right after takeoff, changing the flight path over the sea. Now you might be wondering, why doesn't Migadi's just turn left already? Well, the speed of the 747 is way lower than it should be at this point. If he makes a turn, the plane might descend even more, upping the chances of crashing right into the city. So, the captain decides to keep climbing, following a straight path while he's figuring out Plan B. Do you remember that the airport is surrounded by mountains? Well, this is problem number 4. The pilot knows that in about a mile, the airplane will face a hill that's about 200 feet tall. As Migadi's watches Pawnee Hill getting closer and closer, he decides to give up a few knots of airspeed to gain the altitude he desperately needs to fly over the hill. Migadi's feels relief when he sees that his risky plan has worked. The airplane flies over the hill with only 9 feet to spare. Yet, the relief fades quickly. He still needs to come up with an emergency landing plan. Imagine the cockpit eerily silent. They don't have contact with the tower anymore. While the 2 pilots are doing everything they can to keep Flight 411 from crashing, the flight engineer is still focused on fixing the problems with the engines. The terrain gets lower after the plane flies over Pawnee Hill, so the captain decides to lower the nose of the plane to trade a bit of altitude for speed. But nothing happens. In fact, the airplane's speed just keeps dropping, and they're barely exceeding an altitude of 200 feet. The plane is so low that it's even taking down some television antennas. It's around the height of a 14-story building named the Inter-American Tower. The airplane gets so close to that building that some flight attendants can actually see people's faces inside. A happy ending seems unreal as the plane is approaching a catastrophic collision with Mount Aigaleo, which is over 1,500 feet high. But suddenly, the engines kick in with more power and the plane starts picking up speed. Some specialists believe the acceleration was due to the combination of 3 things. The wind shifted, the temperature outside dropped, and the water injection system kicked back in. And the good news is that with more power in the engines, the pilot successfully gains altitude. By 2:05, Migadi's managed to turn left, avoiding a collision with Mount Aigaleo. The plane is heading towards the ocean. It keeps flying for over 30 minutes to dump fuel. The idea is to make the aircraft lighter before landing, as it's loaded with 160 tons of fuel needed for the transatlantic flight. After that, the captain brings the aircraft back to the same runway from which they took off, and they land safely at Ellinikon Airport. Everyone on board is safe, not a scratch on them. All thanks to this pilot who bravely broke the rules to save his crew and passengers. Now, picture the wild applause on the ground, and Migotti's daughters eagerly waiting for their father as he exits the plane. And it's no small feat, this pilot did the unthinkable. To put it in perspective, every Boeing simulation of this same flight ended in a crash. Migotti's impressive achievement led Olympic Airways to modify some of its procedures, and Boeing began to include a review of this case in its training curriculum. Now, you might be thinking that Migotti's was traumatized after this accident and never wanted to board an aircraft again. But nope. Remember, we're talking about a real hero. At 6 p.m. on that same day, Migotti's took his seat in the cockpit of a replacement Boeing 747 and flew 400 passengers over the Atlantic to New York. As for the aircraft, it stuck around with Olympic Airways for a couple of years until it joined Trans World Airlines in 1985. This 747 Boeing's career ended in 1997 after 24 years of service.
It only takes a moment for a routine flight to turn into a gripping survival story. In a world where a wrong button or an unexpected gust of wind can lead to a disaster, adhering to safety rules is crucial for everyone, from buckling seatbelts to raising window shades during landing. We got all these rules learning from our mistakes. Stay tuned to find out more. A flight had a crazy mid-air moment in 1993 when the pilot accidentally deployed the wing slats, the part on the leading edge of the wing. Now, the weather was fine, passengers were relaxed, everyone was doing what they wanted. Suddenly, they felt an unexpected jolt. Instantly, the autopilot disengaged. The captain started wrestling with the controls. The plane became wonky, pitching and rolling dramatically, resulting in a rapid descent of 5,000 feet. The vibration threw the cabin into total chaos, with passengers screaming in fear. The slats were only to be used during takeoffs and landings, not in mid-air. It was China Eastern Airlines Flight 583, cruising over the Pacific on its way from Shanghai to Los Angeles. The pilot declared an emergency and directed the plane to an Air Force base in Alaska. Out of the 255 people on board, 60 ended up in a hospital, and sadly, 2 didn't make it. The pilot made some quick moves to stabilize the aircraft, but the injuries happened because folks weren't buckled in. They reckoned that the slats deployed because of the design of the control handle. The company was to blame for that. They produced it in such a way that the handle could accidentally get jiggled while cruising. Luckily, the crew was trained, and the airliner itself was fine, except for the messed-up cabin. The aftermath of this incident was costly, requiring about $1.5 million to repair the damage. When the plane started to lose altitude, overhead lockers burst open, and the safety video played 3 times for an eerie touch. Once the aircraft steadied, flight attendants jumped into action, providing first aid, leaving empty kits scattered in the cabin. It turned out that the poorly designed slat control handle had caused 11 similar incidents before. The captain probably nudged it accidentally while fixing the speed controls. The lack of pilot training on high-altitude issues and the stall warning system made things worse. If the passengers had kept their seatbelts on, injuries would have been way less severe. This has been the case during many other accidents. You probably know this airplane announcement. Even when the seatbelt sign is off, buckle up when you're seated. Experts say it's a good call. While flying is safe, keeping that seatbelt on is smart because you might hit unexpected turbulence. It's about keeping you secure during that bumpy, jarring time, especially that sneaky one during stormy weather. Sarah Wilson, the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, thinks the seatbelt sign should be turned on throughout the entire journey. Predicting turbulence is like trying to guess the weather. It's not 100% accurate. Turbulence can happen anywhere. Aircraft are tough. They can handle really bad turbulence. The real risk is getting injured during turbulence, not planes falling apart. It's rare, but accidents still happen. In a dramatic episode in 2016, a pilot pulled off a superhero move, saving 439 lives. He was getting ready for takeoff in Shanghai. All of a sudden, another plane showed up on the runway in front of him. Reacting with lightning-fast speed, the pilot swiftly elevated his plane, narrowly avoiding a disaster. The pilot was awarded $360,000 for his remarkable skills. He missed the other plane by less than 67 feet, about the length of a semi-trailer truck. It turned out that the air traffic controllers and the landing crew had mixed things up. 2 controllers lost their licenses, and 13 others got in trouble. They say this incident was like a throwback to the Tenerife airport collision in 1977. Back then, 2 jumbo aircraft collided on a foggy runway. They didn't get lucky that time. The incident was a total disaster. Certain accidents in aviation history prevented others. With each crash, something crucial is upgraded. In 1956, 2 planes collided over the Grand Canyon, resulting in the tragic loss of 128 lives on board. This accident kick-started a $250 million air traffic control system enhancement. The Federal Aviation Agency also appeared in 1958 to keep an eye on air safety. Then, in 1986, a private plane accidentally entered the Los Angeles control area, colliding with another aircraft. This tragedy took 86 people's lives. In response, collision avoidance systems were introduced. In 1978, United Flight 173 faced a landing gear problem. This led to a crash that claimed 10 lives. This incident triggered a transformation in cockpit training, introducing cockpit resource management. This management method shifted away from the traditional captain-centric approach to emphasizing teamwork and communication among the crew. Another upgrade was about averting in-flight emergencies. In 1983, Air Canada Flight 797 had smoke in the rear lavatory, which led to an accident that took 23 lives. The FAA responded by requiring smoke detectors and automatic fire extinguishers in aircraft lavatories. Post-1998, planes got retrofitted with fire-blocking seat cushions and floor lighting, with newer ones adopting flame-resistant materials. Winds can be dangerous in certain circumstances. The crash of Delta Flight 191 in 1985 brought attention to the dangers of wind shear. Research efforts by NASA and the FAA led to the development of forward-looking radar wind shear detectors. By the mid-90s, these became standard on airliners. The number of wind shear-related accidents has reduced significantly since then. In 1985, United Airlines Flight 232 faced a nightmare when the DC-10's engine failure left it virtually uncontrollable. Pilot Alfred Haynes landed the plane at a nearby airport, but the subsequent fire was terrifying. 185 passengers survived the catastrophe. The root cause of the incident was a crack in the fan disc, which occurred during the manufacturing of the titanium alloy. This incident prompted the FAA to modify the hydraulic system, implement redundant safety systems in future aircraft, and revolutionize engine inspection protocols. In 1988, a big chunk of an Aloha flight's fuselage ripped off in mid-flight. In an instant, the cabin was torn open, leaving the passengers exposed to the open sky. Despite the chaos, the pilots managed a safe landing, with only one fatality. The NTSB found that corrosion and fatigue damage, which had accumulated over 89,000 flight cycles, had caused this accident. The plane had been used for short-hop pressurized flights between the Hawaiian Islands. Shortly after, the agency initiated the National Aging Aircraft Research Program in 1991. This program tightened inspection and maintenance standards, especially for high-use and high-cycle planes. About 80% of mishaps happen in the first 3 minutes after takeoff or the last 8 minutes before landing. Keep your eyes peeled during these times, and your survival chances will go up. Now, don't let that freak you out. The odds of actually getting into a plane crash are like 1 in 11 million. That's the same possibility as being struck by lightning in a given year in the United States. Planes, on the other hand, often get struck by lightning, but they're built to handle it. Each plane probably gets zapped about once every year or every 3,000 hours it's up in the sky. But there hasn't been a lightning-related accident since 1967. Engineers have ensured that when a plane gets hit, the lightning just zips right through it and out without really messing up anything inside. Let's delve into the fascinating mechanics of how planes stay airborne. The wings are important, But it's not just about them. There are 4 forces at play: lift, thrust, drag, and weight. The little tails on the ends of wings are called winglets, and they help reduce air swirls, making the aircraft slicker and faster. There's a reason why lights dim when a plane lands at night. It prepares everyone for a quick evacuation, helping the eyes adjust to the dark should the landing go awry. You're in a bright room filled with obstacles, and suddenly the lights go out and you're asked to dash for the exit. Tricky. Flight attendants also ask you to raise those window shades during landing. In case of an emergency, they want you to be able to see what's outside and figure out if one side of the plane is better for a quick escape. If you're wondering where the safest spot in an airliner is, it's in the back. According to research conducted by Popular Mechanics spanning from 1971 to 2005, sitting in the back gives you a 40% better shot at making it through an accident. Almost as importantly, you're closer to the restrooms.
Have you ever watched an action-packed Hollywood film where an airplane gets a hole in its side, and everyone starts freaking out? Stuff starts flying all over the place and people are barely staying in their seats. Well, in real life, a small hole in the plane's body isn't going to cause that much drama. However, I have an incredible story to tell you about a pilot who actually managed to land a plane with half of its roof missing. Can you believe it? Make sure your seatbelt is fastened because this one is going to be a wild ride. On April 28, 1988, a Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines took off from Hilo International Airport en route to Honolulu. Before this flight, the plane had already flown 3 short trips from Honolulu to Hilo, Maui, and Kauai. Everything was chill that day, and the weather was nice and calm. It looked like smooth sailing all the way. The captain of the flight was Robert Schornsteimer, and the co-pilot was Madeline Tompkins, both experienced pilots with thousands of flight hours in the Boeing 737. Bright and early that morning, before taking off from Honolulu, Madeline did the regular pre-flight inspection and said that everything was good to go. At 11 a.m., they took off from Honolulu and went to Maui, then Hilo. When they got to Hilo, they didn't leave the cockpit or check the plane from the outside. It wasn't a requirement, so why bother? At 1:25 p.m., the plane took off for the final leg of the round trip, with 95 people on board. 89 passengers, 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, and an FAA traffic controller who sat in the observer seat in the cockpit. The plane had taken off like normal and reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet without any hiccups. But then, 26 miles from Kahului, things went totally haywire. The pilots heard a loud whooshing sound, followed by a crack, and then a rush of wind that was so loud it was deafening. Turns out, a small section of the roof on the left side had come loose, causing the plane to decompress explosively. And to make matters even worse, the decompression caused a chain reaction that led to a huge chunk of the plane's roof ripping off completely. That missing part was a massive 18.5 feet long and was part of the skin that covered the plane from the cockpit all the way back to the forewing area. The pilots didn't have a clue what was going on when the disaster struck. The first officer, who was the one in charge of the plane at that time, suddenly felt her head snap back, and then she saw a bunch of gray insulation and debris flying around the cockpit like it was a tornado. Meanwhile, the captain took a look around and was shocked to see that the cockpit door was nowhere to be seen, and instead of the first-class ceiling, he was staring straight up at the sky. The plane started to tilt from side to side, making it challenging to keep it under control. The crew in the cockpit quickly put on their oxygen masks, and the captain took over control of the plane. He then initiated an emergency descent towards the nearest airport on Maui Island. Luckily, all the passengers were seated, and most of them had their seatbelts fastened since the seatbelt sign was still on. Unfortunately, the 3 flight attendants were caught off guard. One of them was near the hole and was pulled out of the plane. The other 2 were thrown to the floor, with one of them hitting her head hard and losing consciousness. The third attendant tried to help the passengers and keep them calm. At the same time, the pilots were desperately trying to let air traffic control know that they were in trouble. But there were communication problems even between themselves due to the loud noise and the fact that they were wearing oxygen masks. They had to resort to hand signals to understand each other. Moreover, they were unsure whether their messages were being heard by ATC. The plane's controls were not responding properly, which made the captain's job of flying the plane even harder. The first officer was doing her best to assist the captain and communicate with the tower. It was only after the plane descended to an altitude of 14,000 feet that the controller finally received their distress call and immediately started making arrangements for an emergency landing. The control tower wasn't prepared for a situation like this, though. In fact, the tower had to call 911, just like any other regular person would do in case of an emergency. The problem was that the controller didn't understand the severity of the situation, and they didn't realize that the passengers and crew members would need medical help. This was because the crew had only reported a rapid decompression and hadn't explained the entire situation in detail. The plane was in a very bad mess, but the captain was doing everything he could to safely land the plane. As they descended towards the airport, the captain commanded the first officer to lower the landing gear, but the indicator light didn't turn on. The plane also had an issue with the left engine, which failed as they approached the runway. Despite these problems, the captain used the reverse thrust of the working engine to try and land the plane. It was a difficult and dangerous task, but they managed to land the plane safely on the runway. The passengers and crew members were then evacuated from the plane. It was a miracle that everyone survived. However, 65 people were injured. They had been hit by debris and pieces of the plane's body that were flying around. Unfortunately, the ground staff wasn't aware of the severity of the situation and didn't have enough resources to provide immediate medical assistance to the injured passengers. The first ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the plane landed, which wasn't an ideal scenario. Furthermore, there were only 2 ambulances on the entire island, which couldn't accommodate all the injured people. As a result, tour vans were used to transport the passengers to the hospital. Fortunately, 2 drivers who were former paramedics provided immediate first aid to the injured right on the runway. Meanwhile, the airport mechanics and office staff took the vans to the hospital, which was located 3 miles away. Despite the chaotic and stressful circumstances, only 8 people suffered severe injuries, but they all later made a full recovery. The plane was in really bad shape though, and it was no wonder it couldn't handle the stress of the decompression incident. Despite its age not being a problem, it had experienced a whole lot of takeoffs and landings, which took a toll on its integrity. The salty and humid environment it operated in only added to the damage. You see, planes are designed to withstand a certain number of flight cycles, and this plane had exceeded that number by a long shot. The majority of its flights were short domestic ones, which meant it had to take off and land way more times than it was designed for. This is what ultimately led to the roof coming off during the flight. The poor condition of the plane meant that it was beyond repair and had to be dismantled right there at the airport. What's interesting is that in an interview after the accident, one passenger recalled that she had noticed a crack in the plane's fuselage while she was boarding. She didn't tell the flight crew about it because she didn't think it was worth it, so they didn't know to check it. It's important to remember that these types of accidents are very rare nowadays. Major airlines and airports take numerous steps to ensure safety, and according to Harvard University, the chances of being in an airplane accident are about 1 in 1.2 million. And that's a tiny percentage, and I don't know about you, but I find that very comforting. And even if something did happen, such as the roof of the plane coming off, it's reassuring to know that the pilots are trained to handle emergencies and can still land the plane safely.
It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Saqqara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Saqqara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane. But this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oupart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only example of such a revolutionary concept. In 1901, a group of divers retrieved the Antikythera mechanism from an underwater shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's been dubbed the world's first analog computer, and it's currently dated around 100 BCE. The bronze mechanism could tell the position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, as well as the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, and even the speed at which the moon moves through the sky. No one's sure who used it and how or where it was made. But it's obvious that it's extremely precise and way too advanced for its time. The first flushing toilets in the world were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Just kidding. The ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with this brilliant invention at the same time, around 4,000 years ago. The plumbing and sanitation were so well done that no one managed to design anything better until 2,000 years later. One ancient Minoan lavatory was discovered at the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat set over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop reservoir to an underground sewer. Other varieties got water from jugs. Only the super rich people could afford all this glory. So if you wanted to shop for real estate back then, the flushing toilet would be a telltale sign you were in the rich neighborhood. Automated doors became a cool, seemingly new invention back in 1931. But the technology behind them is actually much older. Think the 1st century CE old. mathematician and engineer Heron of Alexandria came up with a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. To bring it into action, you need to light a fire to produce heat. There was a brass pot under the fire, half filled with water. The inventor connected the brass pot to containers that acted as weights. When the fire was burning, the water moved into the containers. They went down and pulled the ropes. It was nothing like a supermarket door that opens in front of you before you even have time to think. Heron's door took hours to open, and there was no way to stop the process. That's why they only opened the doors once a day before people entered the temple, to add some mysticism at the temple during ceremonies. Spooky. Looks like the first ever battery was invented in Baghdad around 2,000 years ago. A German archaeologist found this oval-shaped clay jar in 1938. Scientists are still not sure what purpose it served and who exactly invented it. There is a theory that it was used for electroplating objects with precious metals. When they filled it with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced around 1 volt of electricity. Another theory says it was a vessel for sacred scrolls. Would you like to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself? In 1508, he invented a glass lens with a funnel on one side. You were supposed to wear it with water inside to improve your vision. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So, around a century later, French scientist René Descartes decided to improve the idea and make the cornea contact the future lenses. Contacts because they contact your eyes, get it? The glass tube with liquid did help improve vision, but blinking was sadly impossible. 2.5 centuries later, new technologies in the glass industry let scientists design contacts that would fit in the eye and even let the wearer blink. Thanks, guys! Still, those lenses were made of heavy blown glass and didn't let the eye breathe. About 50 years later, contacts became plastic, lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant, but still covering the entire eye. And then, in 1948, an English optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and figured out they'd still be in place even if they covered only the cornea. Imagine you're living in 19th century London and need to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days to get there by ship. So when delivery time went from days to hours in 1858, it was a true sensation. The first message was sent by Queen Victoria herself. It was all made possible thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, running under the ocean. Sadly, the new cool invention only lasted a few weeks. It took years to bring it back to life. Welcome on board. This is your captain speaking, and I have some information about our flight today. It was supposed to be a regular flight for a British Midland Airways Airbus 312 from Cyprus to Great Britain. It all happened on May 26, 2003. The last thing the 213 passengers and 8 crew members would expect was a hailstorm to attack their plane. Yet, it happened when they were approaching Manchester, England. The weather got really harsh, with huge hail and chunks of ice in the air. Passengers who chose not to buckle up were thrown from their seats. The plane dropped and started to vibrate. There was panic aboard. As the passengers remembered later, everyone was out of their seats for a few seconds and stuck on the ceiling. The pilot, who had 20 years of flying experience, had never been in a similar situation before, but did everything to save the plane and the passengers. They landed at Manchester Airport with a 30-minute delay. Everyone aboard was really happy and thanked the crew. They all survived without significant injuries. Airport services inspected the plane after landing. It turned out that the hail had damaged the Airbus's nose and the windshield a lot, but the internal systems were perfectly fine. Years later, in October 2022, a similar story happened to LATAM Airlines Paraguay's flight. It was carrying 48 passengers from Santiago de Chile to Asunción when a major hailstorm interrupted the plan. Passengers shared videos from the cabin, and it looked like a scary movie set. The plane was shaking badly, and the lightning flashed outside.
Luckily, no one got injured and the plane made a successful emergency landing in Brazil. Just like in the story of the British Airbus flight, the severe hail left a gaping hole in the aircraft's nose and shattered it. Just like in the hail is obviously really dangerous to planes. When it breaks the windshield, the pilots have to deal with rain and super strong winds. Hail dents the leading edges of the wings and tail, which means it decreases lift and makes the plane unaerodynamic. That's why it has to fly faster than usual to stay in the air. In extreme situations, hail can even make the engine flame out or severely disrupt plane systems and put flight safety at risk. Another natural phenomenon planes don't exactly love is a thunderstorm. Takeoff and landing are already the most dangerous parts of the flight, even in normal conditions, and a thunderstorm makes them much riskier. Microbursts, which thunderstorms bring along, can make the pilot lose control of the plane. If the storm catches the plane in midair, things aren't that bad. Modern aircrafts are designed to withstand bad weather conditions. Pilots can also climb to a safe altitude above the storm, or fly around it. To land or not to land directly in a thunderstorm depends on how severe it is. If it's a strong one with microbursts, the plane may slam into the ground at high speed because of a strong downdraft. They're loud and feisty, and they're the pilot's worst nightmare. I'm not talking about rowdy passengers here, but about volcanoes. On June 24, 1982, British Airways Flight 9 was on its way from London Heathrow to Auckland, with 5 stops on the way: Mumbai, Chennai, Kuala Lumpur, Perth, and Melbourne. Boeing 747 performing the flight made it to Kuala Lumpur uneventfully. Most passengers were exhausted by that time after all the traveling. The crew, though, were fresh and full of energy as they only got on board in Kuala Lumpur. The flying conditions were perfect, and everything promised an uneventful 5-hour flight. Once the plane reached its cruising height, the crew noticed weird fumes rising up from the vents at the floor level. Then, the pilots noticed a super intense St. Elmo's fire phenomenon right at their windshield. Normally, it's a harmless discharge of static electricity on a metal surface, and planes, as well as ships, experience it on a regular basis. But the weather radars weren't showing any thunderclouds whatsoever. They turned on the landing lights and saw a weird cloud surrounding the plane. They decided to continue the flight anyway, but the fumes now got to the passenger cabin. They were getting thicker and smelled like sulfur. And then, some window seat passengers noticed that the engines were bright blue with some lights shining through the fan blades. The temperature on board was rising. Then, engines flamed out one by one in a matter of minutes. The plane started gliding. The pilots decided to land it on the water of the Indian Ocean, as they knew they wouldn't have been able to cross the high mountains of the Java coastline and land there. The captain informed the passengers of what was going on. They remained calm despite the heartbreaking news. Landing on water like this would be extremely risky. But suddenly, the engines went back to life, one after another. The pilots managed to get back to normal flight altitude, but one of the engines failed again, and the crew decided to land at the nearest airport. When they approached it, the pilots couldn't see anything, as the windshield looked as though it had been sandblasted. The landing equipment failed, and they had to land the aircraft manually. Despite all this, it all went well, and everyone on board was safe and sound. Later, it turned out that they had to go through this ordeal because they flew into a cloud of volcanic ash, left after the eruption of Mount Galagun. The ash was dry, and that's why no weather radars could detect it. This ash cloud clogged the engines and scraped the windshield. As the ash entered the combustion chambers, it melted and stuck to their insides. And that's how the engines shut down. When the plane left the ash cloud, the engines cooled down. The molten ash became solid, broke off, and the pilots managed to restart them. This story is great proof of how volcanic ash clouds are a huge danger to aviation. Pilots should avoid it by all means because those clouds, which are hard to tell from ordinary ones, reduce visibility, damage flight controls, and cause jet engines to fail. Planes sometimes get delayed or even canceled when it's too cold outside. If the cold comes with a blizzard, Flight control may command the aircraft to stay on the ground and wait until the snowstorm subsides. Ice on the runway is no good either. The landing gear of an aircraft is nothing like a car's wheels, and you can't put studs on them to avoid skidding. Plus, a plane needs to develop speeds on the ground that are much higher than on an average road to take off successfully. If the runway is slippery with ice, the airplane can slide off it easily. The same goes for landing, which is even trickier in freezing conditions because a plane is in a much less controlled environment and is moving at even greater speeds. In 2015, a Delta Airlines flight landed at New York's LaGuardia Airport during a snowstorm and veered out of control. The airport's runway 13 is tricky for pilots even in good weather as it partially extends over the water. Luckily, the plane that skidded off the icy runway stopped moments before ending up in the bay. No one aboard was seriously injured. Freezing weather conditions can also cause frost and ice sheets to build up on the plane itself. Even a thin crust of ice over the wings of a plane can mess with their delicate design and destroy lift. Planes can be de-iced though. The airport staff usually spray them with a special solution that doesn't let the ice build up on the aircraft's skin. Jet fuel and the equipment that pumps it can freeze too if the temperature is too low. The fuel freezes at -40 degrees Fahrenheit, but that can only happen on the ground before takeoff. At a cruising altitude, temperatures may drop as low as -70 degrees Fahrenheit. But since the liquid is inside the plane and burning down steadily, it's much warmer there. On the ground though, nothing stops the fuel from turning into ice. If that happens, the plane won't go anywhere, of course.
So, there you are. You have a long flight, or worse, a series of flights ahead of you, and it makes you stressed out. But don't worry, I'll tell you about some tricks and secrets from experienced travelers that will make your journey easier and more relaxed. First things first, tell me the truth. Are you an overpacker? Then I've got a solution for you. Try to use all the space available to you. For example, it's a great idea to put small items like socks or a swimsuit inside your shoes. Pack your scarf and belt into your handbag and so on. If you're going to travel with a backpack, put the heaviest items at the bottom. Also, try to roll everything. This way your clothes will take up less space and will wrinkle less. Now, when going on a trip, leave your massive wallet at home. Instead, put all your essentials like your passport or cash into a small container or even a toiletries bag. You can also use a mint tin to keep your credit cards and money. Put everything inside, then cover it with a piece of paper and fill the tin with mints. Voila! The perfect hiding spot is ready. Leave large bottles of ocean or moisturizer at home. Get a contact lens case and fill its compartments with the products you need. It'll come in handy during the flight. The air is really dry inside the plane. You can use small travel containers for literally any product you think you'll need during your trip. But if you're worried some liquids might spill, put some plastic wrap over the top of the container, and only after that, cover it with the lid. If you have some vitamins or other pills with you, you can get a travel pill organizer like this one from Amazon. It has several compartments of different sizes, and each of them can hold from 13 to 21 pills or capsules. It also has a sealing ring that will keep your pills safe from dust and dampness. Now, you come to the airport well ahead of time and decide to wander through the duty-free zone. And even though you weren't planning to buy anything, you can't help but put some products in your pockets. Oh, I mean your shopping basket. Don't blame yourself, it's not your fault. Lots of airports are designed in a special way that makes you feel relaxed and at ease. Yep, I'm talking about all those huge windows, a lot of light massage chairs, and comfortable seating areas. And statistically, calm passengers are 10% more likely to spend money on retail, duty-free, and food. One more way airports manipulate you into spending your money is by making you walk through the shiny duty-free stores straight after the security check. But the most curious thing is that the walkway through such stores usually veers to the left. That's done because most people are right-handed, which means they'll use their right arm to pull their luggage and are more likely to look at the right side while passing through the stores. And the duty-free zone veering to the left leaves more space on the right where passengers are most likely to look. By the way, even though duty-free shops have a reputation for being cheaper than in stores, it's not always true. For example, sweets, beverages, and perfumes are likely to cost more at the airport. Plus, be careful with what you buy in a duty-free store if you have a connecting flight. Some airports don't allow you to carry liquids over 3.4 ounces through your layover destination, even if they're from a duty-free store and in sealed bags. Arriving at the airport 2 hours before your flight isn't really necessary. Sure, there are super hectic, ginormous transportation hubs where even 2 hours might not be enough. But in most cases, this recommendation is just an ingenious plan to make you spend more money on shopping, eating, and drinking. After you pass all the security checks and passport control, you'll have the golden hour ahead. That's 60 minutes during which you're most likely to open your wallet, to buy a coffee and sandwich, get a book to read, or even spend a hefty sum on a new perfume. Buying bottled water at the airport can easily make you go bankrupt. There's just one thing every traveler should know. There's free water at most airports. Just bring an empty water bottle through the security check and find a water refill station. These places are usually located near restrooms. If you can't find a modern refill station, there must be at least a water fountain. Now, if you have an opportunity, don't exchange cash at the airport. You'll never get a good rate there. Those who have forgotten to buy some currency beforehand can instead order it online and collect it at the airport. Some services only need a few hours' notice for such an order. Or it might be even better to use an ATM to withdraw some cash at your final destination. Now, to make your trip more stress-free, invest in a high-quality suitcase. This way, you'll be sure that its zipper won't break and your stuff won't end up scattered among other people's luggage. The best option is to get a lightweight one, too. You don't need additional weight while traveling, right? And spinner wheels will help you move your suitcase around much more easily. If there's a possibility, put an electronic tracking device into your suitcase before you check it. It'll help you track your bag during your trip. It doesn't have to be something expensive. You can get one at a reasonable price. Now, here's a very important tip. Take a picture of everything you've packed in your bag before you go to the airport. This way, if your luggage is lost, you'll be able to make a claim with the airline or your insurance company by showing them the items that have been lost. It's bound to increase your chances of receiving compensation for your stuff. You might also consider printing out a copy of your boarding pass and putting it inside your suitcase. This way, if your suitcase gets lost, it'll be easier for airport workers to identify it. Now, if you wear contact lenses, take them off before boarding the flight. That dry air inside the aircraft can dehydrate your eyes and make contact lenses immensely uncomfortable. Ow! When at the airport in a new country, you might be tempted to try some new food it has to offer or buy some unusual snacks to feast on later on the plane. Well, don't do this. Eating anything you're not used to before flying may result in spending more time than planned in the plane's bathroom. You know what I mean? Where's my passport? Ah, here it is. Whew! Wait, have I left my credit card at the store? No, it's here. Does that sound familiar? If you tend to worry about your documents and cards while wandering through the airport crowds, you can get yourself a multi-pocket neck wallet like this one. It has an adjustable neck strap and has enough space to hold your passport, cards, cash, and even your keys. If you're traveling with your family, you can get a large family travel wallet. You can find one spacious enough to contain all your documents and the most necessary stuff you need to have at hand while traveling. And if it's also divided into several named compartments, and some of these products are, you won't need to waste time trying to remember into which one you put your credit card. And here's a bonus fact for you. If you ever see the letters SSSS or star S star on your boarding pass, get ready for additional security checks. Instead of these letters, there may be a checkerboard pattern. Anyway, if you have any of these marks, your carry-on luggage can also undergo a thorough inspection. Why might they choose you for secondary screening? Well, some of the criteria are making a one-way reservation or paying cash for your ticket. In some cases, the selection is absolutely random.
You may take a look through the window when in the sky and see the engines right under the wing. The thought may go through your head something like, "Oh, how fascinating. That little thing is what keeps us in the air at 37,000 feet." And after that, you go back to your movie, book, or iPad. Sure, it's cool, but we kind of expect it to work. Take it for granted and don't pay much attention to it. And at the same time, there's so much work going on behind the scenes. Fasten your seatbelts. Today, we're going to find out what it takes for a plane engine to be ready to go. Before you set foot on a plane or before its engine even starts operating, it must undergo many tests to prove it's safe. In one test, for example, they shoot water in the engine at very high pressure. Most engines change through time. Engineers tend to always build something new, improve some features, and generally upgrade engines to make sure they work the best they can. This part is certainly fun, or at least it is until the engine meets Mother Nature. To make sure it will remain efficient, experts need to create an engine that will be able to withstand insane storms, rain, ice, snow, extreme heat, and so much more. An engine needs to be ready for all that even before it gets into production. Engines can take enormous amounts of water. There are special tests for water ingestion. During such a test, a team forces a stream of water into a running engine. What's amazing is that they shoot nearly 800 gallons of water per single minute directly into it. These tests confirm you'll be safe on the plane, even during a heavy rain or insanely powerful storm. If the engine is designed properly and meets safety standards, the water will come out without damaging it. Moving on. When the temperatures are really low and the weather gets colder, everything gets icy. And that can damage an engine and cause big problems for a plane. Such tests are especially tricky. Experts need to fire all kinds of ice particles into a running engine because you never know what you'll stumble upon up there in the air. By particles, I mean enormous balls of ice they throw into the engine. Not only do they want to see if the engine can take all that ice, but they also need to figure out how quickly it can recover after this. Hot and cold tests are fun too. To test if the engine is going to work in extreme heat, manufacturers will run it at maximum temperature and keep it like that for an extended period of time. During the flight, temperatures might get extremely high, but also very, very low. And when you want to test an engine in freezing temperatures, you need to go to a place where you'll have such conditions. For example, Canada's Arctic area of Nunavut. But dress well, because temperatures over there are not pleasant. They go down to -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, you leave the engine there for a week to test it both in the air and on the ground. You know how cool it is to watch through the window as the plane's going up? Well, the reason it can even lift off the ground is these rotating blades. They're the most important part as they move at speeds of nearly 3,000 revolutions per minute. The engine reaches full thrust as they rotate. These blades just have to be secure, but things happen, so one of the blades might still fall off. That's why tests are an essential part of the process. You can see if some of the blades are not attached firmly enough and fix it, so there's no chance they break off, especially while the plane is flying. If a blade falls off, it might hit other moving parts. It has happened in the past with some planes, so now tests are very strict. They allow specialists to understand if blades are set well before they get attached to the plane. During the test, engineers put a small explosive at the base of one of those blades. At the moment when someone starts the engine, bam! Oh wow, that's how you see if the blade will stay inside the chamber of the engine. If it breaks off, the team goes back to the drawing stage. They know they need to redesign it and repeat the test. even if a blade is as small as your finger, it can cause lots of trouble to the engine and, by that, the entire airplane. Speaking of blades, have you noticed those little white spirals you can see here in the center of an engine? They look cool, but they're definitely more than that. They're primarily there for the safety of the crew on the ground. Crew members usually can't hear it when the engine is running because they're mostly wearing hearing protection. Thanks to these spirals, they can see when the engines are on, so they can stay at a safe distance. Another reason why they might be important, although this hasn't been proven yet, is that they scare away birds when they're in the air and prevent them from getting up too close to the plane's engines. So you're up there in the air, relaxing and reading your favorite book that keeps you calm. You're not a fan of flying, especially... Oh no, the captain's speaking, saying you might go through some turbulence because you just got caught in the middle of a storm. He says there's nothing to be afraid of. It's normal, even though the chances of lightning hitting your plane are very high at such altitudes. An average commercial airplane gets struck by lightning approximately once a year, and it can be very tricky to deal with this. In the past, some planes experienced that and even had to make an emergency landing. So, engineers needed to create a test to make sure a lightning strike wouldn't shut the engine down. They use lighter materials, like carbon fiber. These materials don't conduct electricity well, so they end up in both engines and the basic structure of the plane. Manufacturers also add a layer of foil or metal mesh, which makes the airplane even more protected from lightning strikes. So, when the captain asks you not to worry, it's not about giving false hopes or anything like that. With the existing system, you most likely won't even feel when lightning hits your plane. There are 3 stages of testing a finished airplane. During the first one, you check the system without the engine running. During the second one, the engine is running while mounted on a special stand. And the ultimate stage, and kinda best part, where you want to check if everything works right, is the in-flight test. You put the engine in a couple of different situations. Once the plane is in the air, the engine needs to show it can produce thrust. Remember those blades? It takes approximately 2 years to build an engine and set it for testing. Tests seem like something you can do within a short time, but in reality, this process can last for up to 5 years for a single model. When manufacturers launch a new design, they will use the first engine they built just for testing. That means that this particular model will never fly commercially. There are many more tests there, of course, like wing flex testing, for example. Wings flex during turbulence. This is the reason you have a smoother ride. They test wing flex to nearly 150% of the maximum flex a plane will experience during a regular flight. Then, there's an acceleration test. Different parts of a plane go through really big stress and pressure throughout the flight. Just picture racing down the runway for takeoff and then having to suddenly stop the flight and the plane itself. Acceleration tests basically apply strong forces to the components, or even the whole frame of an aircraft, just to make sure it will withstand all that stress. A mechanic from Illinois was called out to tow a crashed vehicle. As he approached the upside-down Ford Ranger, suddenly he was struck with inspiration. Now, most people would only see a wrecked car, but this guy saw a whole new type of vehicle. He then took 2 pickups, a Ford Ranger and a Ford F-150. Then, he spent 6 months working on a strange new vehicle. With the 2 cars combined, he created the illusion that there was only one. With enough room for passengers, it's even legally approved to drive along the road. With the 4 wheels on top all spinning autonomously in line with the ones on the road, he creates confusion wherever he drives. Yeah, it looks quite weird even when perfectly parked. The importance of eating your greens is something many wholesale companies try to convey to their potential buyers. One company in England called Birdseye went to the next level. And they built a car in the shape of a pea to promote their products. It's built on the chassis of an off-road go-kart, and it has many parts from a Volkswagen Beetle. It may look like a toy, but it's not. Equipped with a small Honda engine, this little zooming green pea can even reach 60 miles per hour. Unfortunately, you won't see it anywhere on the road, as its only purpose was for a commercial. But it did gain a lot of fame from ads. Rumor has it, many people even inquired about how they could purchase this weird vehicle. In 1964, a small, lightweight Jeep called the Minimoke was designed in the US. They offered it to Great Britain with the belief that it would suit their terrain. Still, the car was rejected for its low ground clearance, and the open side doors weren't quite adapted for the English weather. It was further offered to warmer climates in Portugal and Australia. The idea was that it could be used for tourism, and it could be an easy way to travel around. But without any other use for fun activities like four-wheel driving, it lost popularity. Still, with the introduction of electric engines, it's making a comeback. Well, it's no surprise. The clearance now is higher, the seats are more comfortable, and the price is quite affordable too. The car costs about $21,000. In the early 20th century, cars began to rule the streets. Some of them were steam-powered, but that was far too noisy. There were even electric vehicles, but as they couldn't be powered outside of cities, they also failed to catch on. But there was another, stranger design. In the early 1920s, the Layat Helica was invented. It was also called the plane with no wings. In this car, the driver sits in the front with one passenger seated behind. The aerodynamic body of Layat Helica is structured similarly to a plane. It's mostly made from plywood, with a large propeller on the front to push the car forwards. The designer believed that all the added weight from normal car parts added unnecessary weight. At the time, steel was incredibly important for other uses, and the lightweight frame was his solution. Weighing about 550 pounds, this vehicle could reach speeds up to 106 miles per hour. That all sounds fantastic, but there was a serious downside. The car was incredibly noisy, and to protect their ears, people had to wear similar headwear as though they were in an actual plane. Not the best choice for a road trip, but surprisingly, 30 of these were sold. With a shortage of fuel in the 1940s, inventors were trying to find alternate forms of transport. The electric vehicles were looked at again after being left on the drawing board for the past 30 years. So, a brand new electric car, Lof Electric, was designed in 1938 and then built in 1942. It's a three-wheeled egg-shaped vehicle with room for only one passenger. This egg on wheels was powered by a battery pack. One full charge was enough for this little egg to travel up to 63 miles. It could ride along the roads at its top speed of 44 miles per hour. This tiny car was also quite lightweight, only about 770 pounds. I wish I had such a car today. It would squeeze into any parking spot. Bonus, there were no blind spots in this car, with a 270-degree view around it. But unfortunately, it didn't catch on, and only one was ever made. German engineering has always been at a high standard with automobiles, and one model, the Amphicar, took them to another level. A car that could also be driven into the water and could function as a boat. While driving at modest speeds on the road, the wheels are slightly lower than normal, but once in the water, the front wheels work as rudders. It could sail at a speed of up to 7 knots. The designers were aware that it wasn't the best boat or car, so they advertised it as the best boat driven on the road and the best car to sail on water. It was actually pretty decent as a seaworthy vessel. Many people were surprised that there were no leaks, even if left docked for several hours. It grew in popularity, and almost 4,000 vehicles were sold in the 1960s. It even inspired several more models of boat cars in the automobile industry. Have you ever wanted to hire a limousine? What if the limo is crossed with a plane? One guy decided he wanted to combine his love for a 727 plane with the ability to drive it on the road. First, he found a plane. Then he removed the wings and the tail from the body and attached the plane's body to a Mercedes-Benz bus. So, it's kinda a regular bus in a plane's disguise. Stretched at 52 feet, it became the biggest limousine in the world. There's enough room for 40 people, but it can still drive at up to 124 miles per hour. The cockpit is mostly preserved. However, a steering wheel was replaced to drive the limo, for obvious reasons. The original folding staircase still works, making it a nice welcome to passengers while boarding the Boeing limo. Surprisingly, it's registered to be driven on the road, and you can even rent this 24,000-pound limousine. At the beginning of the 20th century, car engines became a lot more efficient, and the availability of affordable gas helped automobiles really kick off. Back in 1927, car designers invented something really posh. Meet Bugatti Royale. It was the most luxurious car ever made. At 21 feet long and weighing 7,000 pounds, almost twice the average weight of a sedan built today. However, at the time of its creation, there was a great decline in the economies around the world. Unfortunately, this lavish car wasn't a success. Even the royalty of Europe had no interest in such an extravagant purchase. 25 had been planned to be made, but as interest faded, only 3 were sold. The production line ceased with only 7 built in the end. The engine design was based on a French aircraft engine and is the largest ever built. But following the failure of the Bugatti Royale, the remaining engines were reused for newly built high-speed rail cars for the French railway system. In 1930, an inventor, John Archibald Purves, created something he believed will be the high-speed vehicle of the future. He got his inspiration from designs made by Leonardo da Vinci. John felt that the brilliant man was onto something. He then created the Dynasphere, a mono-wheeled vehicle that ran on electricity. This 10-feet-high singular wheel, made from lattice iron and covered in leather, weighed around 1,000 pounds. The driver's seat and the motor are connected and mounted on wheels. At first, steering was only possible when the driver leaned to either side, but later, a steering wheel was implemented to make it easier. It could reach up to 30 miles per hour. There was some interest in it as a fun activity for the beach. And a modified version with 8 seats was also made. But unfortunately, the designer's vision of giant wheels covering the highways instead of cars didn't come true. Probably because he has yet to find a way to stop it from moving, other than running into something. The Himalayas have some of the highest peaks in the world, including Mount Everest. But it's no surprise airplanes find it difficult to navigate the area. But why are commercial airplanes actually banned from flying there? For starters, these mountains have an average height of more than 20,000 feet. Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the entire world, stands at 29,037 feet high above sea level. The area is rough, filled with snow, and has almost no flat surfaces. In case of sudden cabin depressurization, it would be really difficult to perform an emergency landing, since there's literally no flat area there. More so, the low oxygen environment at such an altitude means there's likely to be a lot of turbulence. Not only is it really unpleasant for passengers, but random air movements and high wind velocity means that it's really difficult to maneuver the airplane. This area is also quite low populated, so there's not much there in terms of radar systems. And radar is crucial for aviation safety. Without radars, pilots would be unable to communicate with the ground to figure out flight conditions. It can also get so cold up there that jet fuel might completely freeze. Sure, the fuels used in airplanes usually freeze at around -50 degrees Fahrenheit, but it may be possible above Everest. The lowest temperature was recorded there back in December 2004, when thermometers showed a staggering -44 degrees Fahrenheit. So, no wonder pilots don't want to ever take that risk, especially on a commercial flight. Among the few airports located in the Himalayas, there's one considered to be the most challenging to land in the world. Only 8 pilots on the planet are certified to do it. It's called Paro International Airport, and it's located in Bhutan, a landlocked country in the eastern Himalayas. First, landing there is so dangerous because you're literally flying through some of the world's tallest mountain peaks. Not to mention that those 8 pilots also have to consider strong winds. Despite the challenges, they do manage to safely land over 30,000 people each year. Moving further, there's no radar there to guide the pilots, so they need to maneuver the aircraft entirely in manual mode. The pilots need to track their movements based on specific visual landmark checkpoints as they approach the runway. Moreover, flights are only allowed there during daylight hours and under good visibility. These pilots also need to watch out for utility poles and roofs on the hillsides too. It means they often squeeze their planes between mountain peaks at 45-degree angles before dropping quickly onto the runway. No wonder only 2 airlines fly to Paro International Airport. Apart from these commercial pilots, there are specially trained helicopter rescue pilots who spend most of their career at 20,000 feet in the sky. Most of the time, they partner with equally experienced climbers who train by crossing the Khumbu Icefall. It's dubbed the most dangerous square mile on the planet. Made up of ice pillars as tall as a 6-story building, this huge stretch of the glacier on Everest's western side is filled with bottomless ice holes. It takes between 4 to 12 hours to get from one edge of the icefall to the other, depending on the experience of the climber. You may think it's a pretty serene location since you're literally only surrounded by ice and snow, but these local professionals claim otherwise. One Everest veteran said that the noise was actually the worst part of the job. The mountain produces awful squeaking sounds and sometimes even sighs. It often makes people feel like it's talking to them, warning them about the treacherous environment. Mount Everest isn't the only no-fly zone in the world. Surprisingly, Disney parks are also part of this exclusive club. So you won't ever be able to look out of your plane window and see the beauty of fairy tale castles from up above. In recent years, a lot of crowded tourist attractions, including Disney parks, have increased their security measures to make sure their visitors are as safe as possible. As such, no aircraft is allowed to fly within 3,000 feet of Disneyland in California or Walt Disney World in Florida. It was initially a temporary ban, but this rule became permanent back in 2003. Some other places don't have planes flying over them because of their historical importance, like Machu Picchu, located in the Peruvian Andes Mountains. There's also a large number of rare wildlife species and plants that grow exclusively in this area. It's crucial that they're protected as well as possible. What does it have to do with planes not flying over that area? Firstly, it reduces the volume of harmful chemicals in the area. Secondly, if a plane ever needed to perform an emergency landing in this location, it'd cause irreversible damage to buildings and wildlife. Surprisingly, planes can fly over the Greek Parthenon in Athens, but with one condition: not to get closer than 5,000 feet above it. This way, the historical building is kept a bit more protected from any emergency landings, since there are specially designated areas around it. You won't be able to see the Taj Mahal from above either, since it's one of the most important, oldest, and most beautiful pieces of architecture in the world. It also needs added security features. This building dates back to the 1600s. UNESCO announced it a World Heritage Site in 1983. The Indian authorities set up a no-fly zone above it in 2006. They did it to safeguard not only the building itself, but also the crowds of tourists that come there each year, 7 to 8 million people. Buckingham Palace is well known for being the residence of British monarchs. So, for the Queen's security, a no-fly zone was set up here too. Planes aren't allowed to fly over Windsor Castle either, to make sure the royal family is equally protected. Other important British buildings with no-fly zones include Number 10 Downing Street, the British Prime Minister's official residence and office, and the Houses of Parliament. George Washington's home in Mount Vernon, Virginia, can only have planes flying above it at more than 1,500 feet. The historical wooden mansion was built for President George Washington between 1758 and 1778. Unfortunately, the building has seen a lot of damage over the years, so in an effort to preserve it better, authorities decided to prohibit vibrations produced by flying aircraft. That's why another no-fly zone was established there. It covers the airspace above this National Historic Landmark. That's probably the reason why you'll rarely see pictures of this house from above. Since it's the residence of the US President, it's not allowed to fly over Washington, D.C. It's also the home of Congress and other establishments. So, the authorities set a special flight rules area, stretching for 30 miles around Ronald Reagan International Airport. This means that it's one of the airports with the most precise takeoffs and landings. Pilots have to carefully tackle no-fly zones, which sometimes results in uncomfortable takeoffs for passengers. Whenever a pilot breaks a no-fly zone, it's a big problem, like the one that happened back in 2005 when a pilot accidentally steered the plane into a prohibited zone. The capital had to be evacuated immediately, and their regular activities were interrupted. Other capitals of the world have similar requirements, like Budapest, for example. In the capital city of Hungary, planes aren't allowed to fly over the ancient inner city of Pest and the Buda Hills. Almost all air traffic is generally prohibited above Paris, too, with some exceptions. Aircrafts flying no lower than 6,500 feet. Flying helicopters are also a big no-no within the city limits. Only certain choppers undertaking precise missions can get special authorization. Generally, passenger planes aren't allowed near the island of Manhattan either, partly because of the really tall buildings there and the added risk of collision, but mostly because all three major New York airports, John F. Kennedy International Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, and LaGuardia Airport are very close to each other, so the air traffic in the area has to be really well thought out to make sure the planes don't cross paths.
Pilots can't eat similar meals when they're working. Imagine that you're on a transoceanic flight. The airplane is flying over the Pacific Ocean. Flight attendants deliver the dinner meals. Everyone is enjoying the pasta. The sauce tastes a bit funny though. That's probably okay. After all, you are eating an aircraft meal. It can't taste like a 5-star chef plate. Time goes by. Oh no! You were right! Something was indeed wrong with the food. But if all the passengers have the same problem, so do the pilots. To prevent both of them being out of order, pilots are advised not to eat the same meal at the same time. In such a scenario, if one pilot feels bad, the other one can take over. I mean, this is not an imperative rule stated by the Federal Aviation Administration, but most airlines make their own rules about this matter. Flight attendants have access to hidden equipment, such as a defibrillator, supplemental oxygen, a fire extinguisher, and duct tape. But probably the most interesting gear they have is handcuffs. These objects are there to protect passengers from others, and sometimes from themselves. Turns out that flight attendants have everything they need to defuse a troublemaker. Aviator sunglasses look cool on pilots in movies, but in real life, they don't wear polarized glasses. First off, they have a glare-reducing effect. This can cause some trouble in the cockpit. A pilot has to read instruments, but the stuff in the cockpit, such as LCD displays, emits polarized light. So a pilot with those cool polarized glasses can't read the displays with 100% efficiency. Pilots shouldn't wear these glasses simply because of safety concerns. Imagine a shimmer of glare coming from another plane's windscreen, but the pilot missed the sign because of polarized sunglasses. Ever noticed a hole in the tail of an airplane? Well, most commercial airplanes have it. Next time you get into an airplane, take a closer look. The hole has a fancy name, Auxiliary Power Unit. It looks like a hole from the outside, but that is actually a hidden turbine engine. Most of the time, the APU will remain off for the entire flight. It will start working when the plane lands. It provides power to the cabin lights, air conditioning, and cockpit electronics. Don't underestimate the APU's power, though. It can also provide the power required to start the main engines. You've watched a Brightside video and learned what the APU is. A perfect icebreaker. Unfortunately, you're not in a chatty mood. You just want to take the plane, land, and start your vacation. Yet again, there is only one door to board. You are at the end of a queue. Why don't planes generally have multiple doors? According to the experts, the biggest issue is that the bridge takes up a lot of space. When an aircraft is loaded from the front and the rear, it takes up 2 slots. This is not ideal for the administrators. Newly remodeled or constructed terminals tend to have dual boarding compared to the older terminals. Change of scenery, let's jump into a cruise ship. There are hidden passageways and secret doors in ships. These secrets are from an insider. Staff on the ship mostly work in their designated area. How does a worker get from one place to another without using the stairs and doors that the passengers use? There is a network of corridors and stairs all around the ship, used only by the crew. I mean it when I say secret doors. they blend with the walls, so they go undetected by those who don't know where the door is. Maybe you can stumble by accident. Here's a clue. Pay attention to the walls near the guest stairs. Try to think of those gigantic cruise ships as floating metals. This leads me to a cruise cabin fun fact. The walls of the cruise ship cabin are magnetic. Imagine you're traveling to multiple countries on board a cruise ship, a single-month voyage. You collect destination-themed magnets and decorate your cabin. True cruise fans know this magnet magic, so they put a couple of magnetic hooks into their luggage. Neat tip. Use magnetic hooks to add extra storage in your cabin. Hang clothes and accessories, postcards, or hats. Speaking of ships, why do some ships and boats have small holes constantly releasing water? To keep the bilge free of water. Water builds up over time inside the bilge, and the bilge pump automatically pumps the water out again. Ships don't have headlights. Using a headlight could prevent accidents. If they work for cars, why not for ships? Headlights are the source of light, but the light that comes out of them bounces back at the light source at some point. With cars, for instance, headlights work because the area you want lit is narrow, and you can easily take action if you see an obstacle on the road. For ships, this is super hard. The light source should be powerful enough to light the area the captain wants to see. Large cargo ships, for instance, need more than a mile to stop or take action. Plus, imagine how much brighter should the ship's light be to light the whole area in front of it. They do see each other with different sorts of lights called navigation lights. These are small but practical. They arrange it in a standardized way so that ships could see each other. The exciting thing is that they don't just notice one another in the dark, they also understand each other's movements and directions. Here's an example. Imagine a ship with two nav lights. The one on the front is lower, near the ship floor. The other one on the back is high up. This means the vessel goes to the right. It can safely pass by the other ships without hitting them. Trains don't have seatbelts. A bit weird. Every time there is a crash related to trains, this matter comes up. Pretty much nowhere in the world seatbelts are used on trains. Various studies have been made about this issue. Some of them created simulations of accidents, and the results were surprising. Using a seatbelt on a train could potentially increase the number of injuries. In cars, seatbelts are highly effective in protecting the passenger and are used all the time. The logic behind the seatbelt is to protect the person when a collision causes rapid deceleration, but trains carry so much momentum that they don't stop rapidly. On a plane, passengers use a seatbelt on takeoff, during landing, and if turbulence occurs. There are no such things for trains. Entering and leaving a station is not a high risk. Experts believe focusing and making investments are other ways to improve railway safety. Now, you are traveling by train. You look outside the window. There are small stones along the railway tracks to accompany you on the journey. Those stones are formally known as track ballast. They do a very important job. They provide support to and maintain the tracks. They're not there by mere coincidence, though. Now look at the stones closer. You can notice that there is no single smoothly cut stone on the tracks, because they're not regular stones randomly poured at the rails. Each rock has sharp and abrupt edges. Sharp edges hold on to each other. They protect the railroad from harsh concussions. They facilitate water drainage in heavy rain and keep down the grass and other weeds. Now imagine replacing those with round pebbles. They will slide down. Eventually, the ballast will spread out and tracks will fall apart. The last thing you would want, especially if you were a passenger on that train.
It seems strange that a commercial jet doesn't have keys to turn it on, but it's a bit more complicated than just turning a key. Instead, there's a series of buttons and dials on the control board that starts the complicated process. A battery provides the power to the aircraft that is charged through a small electric generator within the jet's tail. Airflow gets in and moves into the jet's engines to keep them cool. A reserve power then warms the turbines by turning them slowly until they start spinning at the right rate. Then, the engines can be turned on, one at a time. With up to 4 engines on a commercial jet, this entire process can take up to 90 minutes. Planes don't have keys to lock the doors either, but when they sit idle, jets have security guards constantly monitoring them. But even if someone happened to get past them, it wouldn't be a quick getaway.
When you enter the plane, the captain keeps a close eye on the boarding process. They are not only in command of the flight deck, but also of the passenger's cabin. To become a commercial pilot, you gotta have a distance vision of at least 20/20. But depending on the airline, it's sometimes okay if your perfect vision is assisted with glasses. It's time to find a seat on the plane. You checked in late, and you've already had an unpleasant experience of not getting on your flight like that in the past. This is because airlines purposely overbook their flights, just in case there are no-shows or cancellations. So, you didn't get to choose your seat this time. You walk past the front seats in jealousy. There are seats that are always taken much faster because everyone wants to leave the plane as soon as possible after it lands. But if you're choosing safety over early departure, the back is the place to be. It's estimated to be 40% safer in the rear end of the plane. Maybe you'd prefer to drive instead of flying? The chances of something dangerous happening to a plane during a flight are 1 in 11 million. Compare it to the likelihood of a car accident, which is 1 in 5,000. You've been placed at the emergency exit. Excellent, more legroom. Over the past 30 years, legroom has been decreasing more with every year. Up to 5 inches on some airlines. No, you haven't been getting taller. The reason behind this is the more people they're able to fit in, the more money the airline makes. Airlines don't build their own aircraft and use factory-made planes. From there, each airline will determine its own seating structure. This is also why the seats don't line up with the windows. But it doesn't matter. You have the best seat, although it's always a bit concerning when sitting next to an emergency door. What if you accidentally knocked it while asleep and opened it? Relax. It's actually impossible to open these doors while flying. The air pressure inside pushes against every square inch of the cabin. On the door itself, this pressure equates to 1,000 pounds across every square foot of the door. But even if you somehow developed Hulk-like strength in your sleep, you still wouldn't be able to open it as there's a series of electrical and mechanical devices that latch it closed. The extra measures are important as the moment the door opens, the entire cabin temperature would quickly drop, and that drastic change in pressure would weaken the plane's structure. It's time for takeoff, and they've asked you to turn your phone off. Should you really? 10% of people have admitted that they don't turn theirs off and don't even set them to airplane mode. Cell phones can cause issues, but they don't disrupt the electronics as you might believe. There is a genuine concern that while you're flying in the air, your phone can receive signals from multiple towers on the ground, providing stronger distractions for the pilots. So let's make their job a little easier and turn it off. The plane has reached 40,000 feet, your ears have popped, and the seatbelt sign is turned off. The flight attendant walks down the aisle with their arms held outward. Within such a thin passage, they walk this way as it helps with their balance. They try to avoid disrupting passengers, so they don't use the headrest of the seats. And in case of sudden turbulence, there are special grabbing spots under the overhead luggage bay. It's estimated that 500,000 people are flying in the sky at any given time. So right now, you're part of that special group involving 0.1% of the world's population. You look out the window and notice the white wings. Planes are painted white and other lighter colors as well to help reflect solar radiation. This avoids damage from the sun by reducing the amount of heat the plane receives.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence.
But further in the distance, dark clouds approach and the plane is heading towards a thunderstorm. Since it's made of metal, it has to be a big electric conductor, right? Thankfully, jets are fitted with an aluminum shell that conducts electricity very well. The cabin's interior is completely shielded from lightning, protecting electrical systems and leaving us carbon-based mammals unhurt. A plane is so perfectly built for electrical storms that it's one of the safest places to be. There haven't been any major incidents from a storm since the 1960s. You're thirsty and you're aware that you should have brought your own water. When aircrafts land at each location, they refill their water supplies. The water quality in a plane is based on where they collected the vital liquid. Many things contribute to the water quality of every airport. Water cabinets, trucks, carts, and hoses all could be of different standards. In 2019, an airline water study found that most airlines weren't providing clean water, so the general recommendation is to only drink water from a sealed bottle and avoid even tea. But the food is perfectly fine. As you sit back down, you notice the cabin is cold. Super cold, to be honest. It's intentionally set to around 71 degrees Fahrenheit for a good reason. When people become vulnerable to fainting, it's due to not receiving enough oxygen. And when there's warm air mixed with high cabin pressure, fainting becomes more common. So, while the cold air is helping those who need it, you've been provided with a blanket for your comfort. Warmed up with a blanket, you notice the dry air running through your nose, and it dehydrates your lips and eyes. But don't worry, the air is completely safe and very clean. 40% of the air is recycled and goes through a thorough cleaning system to remove all dust and airborne bacteria, and the other 60% comes from the outside. The humidity levels in the air get very low, and that's why you feel all that discomfort. It's now dark outside as the plane begins its descent to land, and the lights are dimmed. The dimmed lights aren't for the pilots or crew or those at the airport. They're for you. If something goes wrong while landing when it's dark, they'll have to start an emergency procedure. The dimmed lights are there to help your eyes adjust and help you follow towards the exit in the dark easier. But luckily, today, it won't be necessary, as your journey has come to an end.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the pilot of your plane speaking. Please fasten your seatbelts and stay calm. Don't worry, everything's fine. We're just falling! Ah! Okay, don't panic. Yes, we're falling, but the landing is gonna be great. And do you know why?
Because this is a video about the most incredible landings with happy endings. So, imagine this situation. You're in a giant passenger Boeing. The plane is flying from Montreal to Edmonton at an altitude of tens of thousands of feet. Weather is good. There's no turbulence. But then, you notice a strange silence. You don't understand what's happening. Exactly. The sound of engines is gone. And do you know why? Because they stopped working right in the air. The plane has run out of fuel. It'll take you a couple of minutes to get to the nearest gas station, if you fly straight down. It's a real accident that happened on July 23, 1983. That flight got nicknamed the Gimli Glider. During the fueling of the aircraft, the crew confused the measurements. They thought they were pouring American gallons, when it was actually liters. The pilots realized the mistake when they were already in the sky when the fuel had run out. They didn't panic and put the aircraft into the optimal mode to increase its flight range. One of them knew that the Gimli Air Force Base was nearby. There was a small runway there. At that moment, it was filled with some garbage and carts. The pilot contacted the base and warned them about the emergency landing. The employees of the base cleared the runway in a matter of minutes. The plane began to land very smoothly. The pilots controlled the aircraft by using its wings. They needed the last drops of fuel to brake with the help of turbines. When the plane touched down, the front landing gear broke. The landing was tough. The whole plane was shaking, and the passengers were terrified. But everything ended well. No one got hurt. On November 1st, 2011, a Polish Airlines 767 passenger plane was flying from the USA to Warsaw. 30 minutes after taking off, the pilots suddenly realized the landing gear didn't work. They warned the passengers about it. The wheels didn't come out because of some hydraulic error. Pilots remained calm and continued the flight. They almost reached the final destination and made several more attempts to deploy the landing gear. Nothing worked. They realized they would have to make a hard landing. When any airplane lands at this speed without wheels, it releases a lot of sparks, and its body heats up because of friction with the ground. In this case, the chance of a fuel tank fire is high. That's why the pilots had to circle around the airport for about an hour to burn fuel. Then, when the tank was almost empty, they started landing without the landing gear. There were sparks, metal grinding against the runway, the cabin shaking. The lower part of the fuselage turned red because of the high temperature. After sliding for a while, the plane stopped. About 231 people on board were rescued, thanks to the pilot's professionalism. Probably one of the most famous emergency landings occurred on the Hudson River on January 15, 2009. Pilot Chesley Sullenberger became a hero that day. The plane he was flying collided with a flock of geese during its departure from New York. The engines were out of order. There was only icy water under the aircraft and almost no chance of salvation. Even now, experts say that the risk of crashing the plane was very high, but experienced Chesley Sullenberger knew what to do. He did his best to calm down, focused on his work, calculated the exact angle at which the plane needed to touch the water, and successfully landed the aircraft. If he had made the slightest mistake, the plane would have lost its wings and drowned almost immediately. Chesley Sullenberger saved the lives of 155 people and became a celebrity. There was one dangerous situation in the sky on June 10, 1990. Not for passengers, but for the pilot. Flight 5390 British Airways took off from England and headed for Spain. It was gaining altitude, and the flight attendants started serving food to the passengers. At that moment, the pilots heard some noise. Condensate began to fill the cabin. Then, the glass on the side of the captain flew out of the window frame. He was pulled halfway out of the cabin because of decompression. His knees got stuck in the control panel next to his seat. The first officer grabbed him tightly by the belt. The temperatures were extremely low, and an incredibly strong wind was blowing outside. The plane began to descend, gaining speed. The autopilot shut down. The flight attendants grabbed the captain so that the co-pilot could operate the controls with both hands. The oxygen level was decreasing, so he began an emergency landing. The captain was outside the plane for about 20 minutes, and despite the extreme conditions, he survived. The plane landed successfully. The captain was taken to the hospital, and the glass was replaced. Further investigation revealed that the window had flown out because the bolts used there had been wrong. A plane runs out of gasoline. The engines stall. An aircraft crashes into a flock of birds. That's all pretty scary stuff. But what if a plane broke in half? This really happened in April 2022. A DHL Boeing 757-200 cargo plane was picking up speed on the runway. It was going to fly to Guatemala. The aircraft took off, and the pilots noticed some malfunction in the hydraulic system. They didn't fly far away, so they asked the dispatchers to allow them to land. The plane turned around and began to descend, and at that moment, its tail just broke off. The plane ran off the runway. Its hull was hot, but firefighters poured anti-fire foam on it just in time. Fortunately, none of the crew members got hurt. What caused such an accident is unknown. The company launched an internal investigation. The next hard landing occurred in the 40s. The pilot and 2 crew members were flying over Papua New Guinea. Visibility was poor because of fog and rain. But, according to the pilot's calculations, they were flying above a wheat field. He began to lower the plane. The clouds cleared, and he saw not a field, but a swampy area. They had no choice but to make a hard landing. It was a success, kind of. All 3 crew members survived, but the plane got bogged down in a swamp. It was impossible to take off, so the crew went to look for the nearest settlement. For 2 days, they were walking through the swamps, sharp tall grass, and hordes of mosquitoes. Exhausted, they reached dry land and met one of the locals. They helped the crew, took them to the village, and provided medical help. The plane was left to rot in the swamp, forgotten. It stayed there for about 30 years. Its whole body got covered with grass, mud, and moss. And the cabin was moldy. The locals loved to climb inside and play with it. Then, in the 70s, some tourists from Austria accidentally found the aircraft. They took a photo of the plane and published it in the local newspaper. It attracted the attention of many photographers and travelers from all over the world. They called the plane the Swamp Ghost. Many tourists visited it and took parts of the plane as souvenirs. In 2016, one American traveler pulled it out of the swamp and moved it to his home.
Is the sky like a desert? Can a commercial aircraft fly faster than the speed of sound? Can you fix a plane with a piece of tape? Let's check your intuition with this cool truth or myth airplane quiz. Make sure to note down your correct answers and share your score in the comments. So, the first one for you. Commercial airplanes are more fuel efficient than your car. True or false? That's actually true. Commercial flights have been more fuel efficient per person per mile than cars for more than a decade. Better technologies and a larger number of people that fit in one plane have decreased the energy intensity of traveling by air by almost 74%. As for cars, it's been just a 57% drop. Okay, how about this one? There's no row 13 on a plane. Well, come to think of it, I've never seen a 13A or any other letter on my boarding pass. What about you? That's true, but only partially. In those countries where the number 13 is considered unlucky, there's really no row 13. But in other countries, the missing number may differ depending on what is believed to bring bad luck there. Opening a plane door during the flight is a real safety risk. It sounds kinda terrifying to me, but is it true? You can relax, that's just a myth. For one thing, the doors are locked, but even if they weren't, no one can open the door of a flying plane. It's physically impossible. The cabin pressure won't allow anybody to do it. When an airplane is at cruising altitude, it's pressurized. The difference between the inside and outside is huge. In other words, the pressure inside the cabin pushes on the door and doesn't allow anyone to open it from the inside. Even better, the airplane door is called a plug door. Its inner edge is wider than the outer. That's why it acts like a bathtub drain stopper, corking the doorway without falling through. Your skin is drier on a plane than it would be in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Can you believe this? And if you think this is true, you're absolutely right. The airplane cabin is pressurized, and the humidity there is set to 20%. For comparison, in the Sahara Desert, the average air humidity is around 25%, and your skin is used to at least 40% of humidity. That's why your nose and throat feel so dry when you're flying. Several years ago, someone posted a photo on the internet that became viral in no time. In this image, there was an airline technician, and he seemed to be fixing a plane with duct tape. So the question is, could it be true? Or was it just a fake? The answer isn't so simple. It wasn't your regular duct tape, so partially, this fact is a myth. But it was some kind of tape, known as speed tape. It costs around $700 per roll. It's actually an aluminum adhesive you can use to temporarily mend minor damage, until you can repair it properly. Is it true that pilots avoid the Bermuda Triangle? After all, it has such a notorious reputation. Ships and planes simply disappear into thin air in this region. This one is certainly a myth. Today, people already know that there's no particular danger in the Bermuda Triangle, and planes fly over this area as usual. Airplanes mostly fly on their own, with autopilots doing all the work. Myth or truth? What's your bet? It's a widespread myth. Many people are sure that planes are some super automated mechanisms that can fly mostly by themselves, and pilots are there simply for backup. In reality though, flying is a hands-on job. It needs constant attention and a skilled flight crew. There once was a plane that flew twice faster than the speed of sound. Can it be true, or is it too far-fetched? This fact is definitely not a myth. The Concorde could reach a speed of 1,330 miles per hour. That's much faster than the speed of sound, which is around 767 miles per hour. And that's indeed almost twice as slow as the Concorde. You might have heard this scary fact before. Planes empty toilets right in the air. Sounds alarming, but is it true? Fortunately, that's only a myth. There's absolutely nothing to this legend. Airplane toilets use a vacuum-based system to transport all the contents out of the bowl and into a special tank. It's located in the rear part of the aircraft, and this tank gets emptied only on the ground. This is a tricky one. When a plane is flying towards the east, it can reach higher speeds. So, can the speed really depend on the direction? And this is true. It's possible thanks to high-altitude winds known as jet streams. They blow at a speed of 100 to 300 miles per hour, and since our planet rotates from west to east, aircraft moving in the same direction can use these winds to move faster. Do you think pilots can control airflow to keep passengers sleepy and relaxed and save on fuel? This one is definitely a myth. If you ask a pilot this question, you might hear "ridiculous" in reply. The truth is that pressurization determines the oxygen level in the cabin. How about this one? The world's tallest air traffic control tower is as high as a skyscraper. Can it be true, or is it just an impressive myth? I know it's hard to believe, but it's actually true. When an airplane lands, it needs the assistance of runway lights and airport beacons. It's part of the responsibilities of the air traffic control tower. It also manages ground traffic. No wonder such construction needs to be extra tall. The new Bangkok International Airport in Thailand has a 430-foot tall tower. Its height is almost the same as the height of a 40-story building. It cost $18 million to build the tower. I've got another tough one for you. The sensitivity of your taste buds dropped by 30% during the flight. Yes or no? This is true. The pressure in the cabin combined with the dryness of the air kinda numbs your taste buds. But the most curious thing here is that this mostly affects salty and sweet flavors. If you're served something spicy or bitter, you can still taste it as usual. Airline caterers try to take the decreased sensitivity of your taste buds into account while preparing airplane meals. They have to modify lots of good old recipes to make your food taste better. As soon as your oxygen mask is on, in case the cabin is depressurized, you can relax and breathe out. You can still use it till the end of the flight. I wish it was true, but is it? Sadly, it's a myth. Passenger oxygen masks usually provide enough air to breathe normally for 10 to 15 minutes. In other words, it's just a temporary solution. But in most cases, this time is enough for the plane to go down to the altitude of 10,000 feet. That's where people can breathe without using oxygen masks. And since planes descend very fast, the need for additional oxygen lasts for a few minutes at most. By the way, the oxygen system gets tested regularly during special maintenance checks. Plus, both passengers' and pilots' oxygen flow doesn't depend on electricity. Masks use individual oxygen generators, so even if there's some electrical problem on board, the oxygen doesn't get cut off. Many people say that the plane is the safest means of travel, but do you believe in it? That's a myth. Flying is the second safest. Studies show that the elevator is safer. Unfortunately, it won't be able to take you to the Bahamas. Okay, this last one was kind of a joke. Statistically, planes are indeed the safest way to get to your destination. So, how many correct answers did you have? Tell me in the comments below. Me, 8. Duh.
That little yellow hook you can see from the airplane's window if you're sitting next to the wing is there to help you in case of an emergency landing. Inflatable slides can only be deployed from the emergency exit doors in the front and the tail of the plane. In the middle, the passengers would have to walk right out on the wing and get to the ground from there. But jumping from the plane wing isn't safe because it's just too high. And here's where those little yellow hooks come in handy. The flight attendants tie ropes from the doors and through the loops for the passengers to hold onto. This way, everyone can safely get to the ground without injuries. Now, you want to try to avoid cozying up under airplane blankets. Some airlines only wash them about once a month. Better use your own travel blanket, a scarf, or a jacket, and always remember to wear your shoes while walking around the plane. That carpet on the floor can't and won't be cleaned to perfection between flights. It's just too much time and effort for the cabin crew. The dirtiest place on a plane isn't the bathroom, it's your tray table. It has 8 times more bacteria than an onboard toilet flush button. Now, in case of emergency, oxygen masks only have enough airflow to last for about 15 minutes. Luckily, it's just the amount of time a plane needs to find a suitable landing place or to at least descend to the altitude where people won't need oxygen masks anymore. You may wonder why you're asked to lift your seat back and close your tray table before takeoff and landing, but it's for your own safety. A reclined seat is comfy for you, but it makes it harder for the passenger behind you to get out of their seat, which is crucial in case of an emergency. The lower tray table is the same way, only this time it's you who won't be able to stand up fast enough if anything happens. Besides, the tray table prevents you from assuming the secure position in the event of an emergency landing. This position requires you to bend over in your seat, put your head between your knees, and cover the back of your head with your hands. Imagine doing that while your tray table is open. If you look around the cabin, you'll notice little black or red triangles around the midsection of the plane. These stickers let the flight attendants know where the airplane wings are located, so they can immediately look out the right window to see if something is amiss outside. You shouldn't lower the window shades while taking off, taxiing, or landing for 2 reasons. First, the flight attendants must always be able to monitor the situation outside, and open shades help them with that, obviously. Second, if something's gone wrong on board the plane while it's on the ground, for example, a fire, the ground crews won't be able to see it and evaluate the situation before going in unless the windows are open. That tiny hole you see at the bottom of any airplane window isn't there to scare you nuts. In fact, it helps keep the pressure from the inside and the outside of the window equalized. The hole itself is only made in the second layer of glass, and there are 3 of them overall, which also helps with security, by the way. Even if the outer glass breaks, there will still be 2 more to keep you safe. Now, you might see flight attendants touching the overhead compartments while they're walking along the aisle, but that's not exactly what they do. Right beneath the compartments, there's usually a handrail that goes all the way through the cabin, so you can also use this trick to stay firmer on your feet in the aisle. The pilots dim the lights in the cabin during nighttime, not for you to get cozy and sleepy. Our eyes have a hard time adjusting to darkness in the first few minutes of sudden lights out. And in the case of emergency, every second matters. So the lights get dimmed to let you get used to darkness in case something happens and you have to act fast. Pay attention to the aisle floor too. If there's an emergency landing at night, there will be 2 luminescent strips along the aisle showing you the way to the exit. Follow them to get safely out of the plane. Flight attendants also suggest counting the seats between you and the emergency exit once you're seated. This will help you navigate in case there's no other guidance available. If a lightning bolt hits the plane, the passengers won't feel it. The entire aircraft is covered with aluminum coating that conducts electrical current and doesn't let it inside. This protection is tested using a lightning simulator. Airplane windows are round because the air pressure is evenly distributed this way. If the plane's windows were square, strong air currents would accumulate in the corners of the windows, depressurizing the cabin, and that's bad. Don't think you become untouchable if you go to the airplane toilet. The bathroom door can be opened from the outside. There's usually a small latch at the top of the door that allows cabin crew to get you out of there. It's useful for both getting to people doing something suspicious in the bathroom and helping those who don't feel well and, for example, collapsed while in the toilet. Yeah, let's avoid doing that. The plane's wings flash red and green lights at night to show the direction the plane is heading in. A green light is always on the right wing, and a red one is on the left. Aircraft tires are designed to withstand 4 to 5 times more pressure than they actually experience upon landing. The wheel is more likely to break than the tire. Pilots always have different meals. This is necessary to reduce the risk of food poisoning. The flight can still go well if one of the pilots has gone down because of a stale burrito, but not if it's both of them. And try not to both of you eat the fish. Some airlines don't allow pilots to have beards. Facial hair can prevent securely fitting the oxygen mask, and pilots must always remain conscious. The seats are blue in most aircraft because this color soothes people. It's also easy to keep clean. The rumbling noise you hear after boarding the plane is luggage being loaded on the plane. The compartment is right beneath the cabin, so it can sound quite loud sometimes. On most flights longer than 7 or 8 hours, pilots have access to a specially designed rest seat in or near the cockpit. Flight attendants typically have a section of the cabin reserved for them, and it's sometimes separated from the passenger areas. Some larger aircraft even feature private crew quarters above or below the main cabin. The wings of most passenger aircraft are located at the bottom of the plane. It's called a low wing. Firstly, if you install the engine under low wings, it'll be closer to the ground and easier to repair. Secondly, the wings will take on part of the shock in case of a hard landing. And if the plane falls into the water, then the wings become a life-saving pillow. By the way, a plane can stay afloat for 10 minutes to 60 hours. It all depends on the model of the plane, weather conditions, and pilot skills. Now, most airplanes are white because this color best reflects the sun rays and the aircraft body doesn't heat up as much. Also, the damage is best seen on white, and white paint is simply cheaper. Shoulder straps seem more secure than just a waist belt, but not in the case of planes. When the plane gets into turbulence, it's tossed a bit in the air. The waist belt will simply hold you in place in case of a more severe shake. Shoulder straps would require more space between the seats, and this is not justified on a plane. In a car, the impact is usually much stronger, so you need that shoulder strap not to whoosh through the windshield. Flight attendant seats do have passenger straps, but that's because they are much less comfortable than passenger ones. They're narrower and positioned facing the passengers. Flight attendants need extra protection simply not to fall off their seats if the plane shakes hard enough. Also, they have to help and direct people during potential evacuation, and for that, they need to be in top shape. Now maybe you've noticed that you always enter the plane from its left side. Firstly, the captain usually sits on that side. This way, it's easier for the captain to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge. Also, the aircraft is fueled and loaded with the baggage on the right side. If passengers come from the left, the crew can do their job undisturbed.
How can spiders survive when they lose a leg? When they're in a dangerous situation and try to run away, they can lose legs and regrow them only a couple months later. They'll survive without any problem because most of the time, their legs come off at break points. Those are joints that contain muscles and constrict, which helps spiders minimize blood loss. If they lose a leg at the part that comes before the break point, the spider still sheds it, but it will lose more blood. It will be harder for the animal to recover in this case. Speaking of spiders, have you noticed how they sometimes stay extremely still for a long time? They're motionless while waiting for potential prey to land in their web. When moving around, they waste energy and drive unnecessary attention to themselves. Either a hungry bird praying for a quick snack will see it, or a spider will remain hungry because flies will be less likely to come near their web. When spinning a web, they waste a lot of energy. Even after the web is finished, a spider may have to wait for days or weeks to catch something. So, it's important to save as much energy as possible. Hunting spiders are way more active, but the majority of them are nocturnal predators. They spend their days relaxing, tucked away under a rock or in a nest. Roast potatoes can stay hot for a really long time, and this mostly has to do with the fatty, starchy crust that's like some sort of an insulating layer. When you pre-boil a potato, this causes its starch granules to absorb water and swell until carb molecules seep out to produce this type of thick gel. Since potatoes are in the oven, high temperatures drive off moisture. This makes the gelatinized starch on the outside of the potato chunk and creates a crispy crust. This crust traps the heat inside,
The fat from the baking tray collects in cracks too, and the heat-keeping structure stays strong. Birds don't get electrocuted while perching on power lines because it's not voltages that will harm them, but voltage differences, and electricity wouldn't flow without them. So, if you see a bird standing on a single power line at, for example, 35,000 volts, the lack of a voltage difference is something that keeps the animal safe. But if it accidentally extends its wings and touches another power line that's at a different voltage, it won't end well. That's the reason why electricity companies make sure there's plenty of space between the cables. Have you ever wondered why airplane pilots won't try to land on grass when the landing gear doesn't deploy? The grass may seem like a good solution at first because it's soft, true. But the surface will neither be smooth nor even. When pressure is high, landing on grass can lead to unpredictable movements and cause issues such as structure formation. That happens because of bouncing and unequal pressure. This can even result in fuel leakage and prevent the doors from opening. Bald heads tend to be shiny, even though the skin elsewhere on the human body isn't. Most of our skin is covered with tiny hairs that give it some sort of velvety peach fuzz look. With male pattern baldness, the hair follicles tend to shrink and turn into skin cells, which means there's no hair there at all. And the scalp is especially shiny due to the sebaceous glands. They produce and secrete some kind of oily matter that protects our skin. Sebaceous glands are located all across our skin, but the scalp has way more of them. So, this oil coats the skin, which is why it turns into a more reflective surface. House cats will rarely meow at one another, but they become chatty with humans, and this could be related to domestication. The process of taming cats and keeping them as pets started nearly 10,000 years ago. Before that, cats were pretty much loners. They rarely encountered other cats, so they didn't even have to use their voices to communicate with each other. Instead, they communicated through their sense of smell, which included things like rubbing against a certain object, for example, a tree. So they didn't even have to come face to face with other members of their species to send a message. And that's how they mostly communicate today as well. But humans don't have such a good sense of smell as cats, so these foxy creatures had to think of a way to send us a message and still get what they wanted from us, which turned out to be meowing. If you're planning a day trip to a desert, for example, the Sahara in North Africa, you're going to want to bring good sunscreen, and a lot of water, of course, but also a snug sleeping bag if you're planning to spend the night there too. Deserts really become cold during the night. In the Sahara, temperatures go from an average high of 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to 25 degrees during the night. Such dramatic change happens because of two main factors: humidity and sand. Sand doesn't retain heat that well. When light and heat from the sun reach a desert, sand grains from the top layer absorb heat. But they release it back into the air relatively quickly. So during the day, the sand radiates the energy coming from the sun, which eventually heats the air and leads to extremely high temperatures. And during the night, the sand is quickly losing heat once again. But this time, there's no sunlight that would reheat the desert. That leaves the sand colder than before and leads to such low temperatures. In arid deserts such as the Atacama Desert in Chile and the Sahara, the humidity is extremely low. That means the amount of water vapor in the air is almost zero. Unlike sand, water does well to store heat. Water vapor in the air traps heat close to the ground. It's like you cover the ground with a huge blanket. That way, you stop it from dissipating into the atmosphere. Also, when the air has a high level of humidity, it requires more energy to heat up. That means it takes more time for that same energy to disappear and for the surroundings to get colder. Since there's almost no humidity in deserts, such areas can both quickly heat up and cool down. If you microwave water for tea, it will taste worse than when it's made with a kettle. That's because the temperature of the liquid is the main factor for a good tea. Water should reach a rolling boil before you pour it over tea leaves, whether they're loose or bagged. It's an easy thing to do with tea kettles, both the electric and stovetop varieties. When the burner or the electric heating element is on, the water at the bottom of the vessel warms up. As it's getting hotter, water through the rest of the kettle comes to the boiling point. A microwave doesn't heat from the bottom up. It creates electromagnetic waves that randomly jump around the box. You probably notice when you try to reheat leftovers, they end up partially frozen in some spots and extremely hot in others. The same will happen with water because it's hard to control microwave energy. Overheated liquid won't be good for tea either. When water goes above 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the boiling point for water, it can destroy the compounds that give a tea its specific flavor. Have you ever wondered why those electrical plugs most Americans use have holes in the prongs? The story dates back to the early 20th century when Harvey Hubble Jr. invented different types of electrical plugs. He started with the detachable electric plug, which was the first ever of that type. Some of his designs had prongs with indents, those aligned with tiny bumps inside the electrical sockets. Such an indent and bump system secured the prongs in place after people would insert a plug into a socket. At some point, these indents gave way to holes, which worked in the same way. But that's just part of the story. Most of the modern outlets don't even have bumps anymore. They keep plugs from falling out of the wall by using friction and pressure. Today, some manufacturers insert a rod through all the holes in a line of prongs. That's how they lock them in place while encasing them in plastic. Some also say the holes save metal, which cuts costs of manufacturing in the long term.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more,